Hey guys, what's up? Can you hear me? Hello, hello. Okay, what's going on? All right. Hey guys, can you hear me? Oh, excellent. Thank you. Perfect.
Telling the untold.
Fault lines.
And we're live again, coming to you from across the divided states of America. We are the most disruptive show in American politics. Fault Lines with Thomas Shane Stranahan. In the politically independent corner, I am investigative political analyst and radio show host Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, a burning ember in the darkness, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
Jamarl and I together are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. And as we do every morning, we're going to get into the headlines. We do these 3 times, once at 7, once at 8, and once at 9 a.m. Eastern. Right after this first batch, we go into Jamarl's monologue. After that, we are taking calls. 202-521-1320 is our number. We'll be taking those in 15 minutes. But first, we have the headlines. First up for me, night 3 of the Republican National Convention last night, Vice President Pence gave a 37-minute speech, warned Americans that they, quote, won't be safe in Joe Biden's America, end quote. Told them that the Trump administration, quote, will have law and order on the streets of this country for every American, end quote. Tomorrow night, we'll round off this year's RNC, this election's Republican National Convention. Trump will be speaking from the South Lawn of the White House. In our next headline, Hurricane Laura was a Category 4 on landfall with surges as tall as 20 feet in a band along Louisiana's coast, south of Lake Charles. It has been called the region's strongest storm in over a century, as it effectively hit the state line between Texas and Louisiana and ran straight up that line. The Vermilion Parish Sheriff's Office asked people in the region to please evacuate, and I'm going to quote here, "And if you choose to stay and we can't get to you, write your name, address, social security number, and next of kin, and put it in a Ziploc bag in your pocket, praying that it does not come to this," end quote. Again, that is the Vermilion Parish Sheriff's Office. 600,000 people in the region have been asked to evacuate, hoping that people there stay safe and stay okay to the best of their abilities. This came right after Hurricane Marco hit the region in a sort of back-on-back double hurricane thing that's last time the last one of these happened in that region apparently was the Great Depression. So you have a concatenation of storms that's historical, dating back almost a century. And then you have the second storm. After the first one, which is kind of underwhelming, the second storm is harsh, the harshest in over a century in that region. So again, bad time for America, man. Bad time in a lot of ways for the world too, but I will just put it like that. In our next headline, continuing the theme, a 17-year-old who shot and killed 2 men and injured 1 other has been arrested after reportedly attempting to flee Wisconsin. That's Kyle Rittenhouse. There's a kind of, I'm going to say it like this. There's a confusing narrative about the order of events I've been trying to figure out as I've been looking into this thing. Kyle Rittenhouse killed 2, injured 1 other, and I'm having a hard time figuring out exactly how the first killing happened. Yeah, we'll get into that. I'm guessing more facts will come out. There were cameras everywhere is the thing. So, a bunch of people had their phones out. And
I'll be explaining in the monologue, Shane.
We'll be coming back to this, undoubtedly talking about it throughout the show today. Next headline, China has fired missiles in the South China Sea in response to the United States flying a U-2 spy plane into the region. China was apparently in the middle of military exercises while the U.S. did that. And again, China responded by firing 2 missiles in the South China Sea as a warning. Yeah, tensions just are increasing everywhere. And then I'll close with this. These short headlines this morning. But Jeff Bezos has just become the world's first $200 billion man. So highest net worth individual in the world by far, passing Bill Gates, who on Wednesday, as of yesterday, was standing at around $123 billion. Jeff is, again, about, halfway past him, a little bit over halfway past him. Bill Gates is only 2/3 as wealthy as the next guy up. The world order is changing quickly. Jeff would have passed that $200 billion threshold earlier if it weren't for the recent divorce that left his ex-wife, Mackenzie Bezos, with a little over $60 billion in stock. Most of that money comes from Bezos' ownership of Amazon, of course, which as a company is worth about $1.72 trillion. That is behind only Apple, which is valued at over $2 trillion, recently passing that mark to some acclaim/notoriety. I'll close it there. We're going to come back on the Kyle Rittenhouse stuff. A lot more headlines to talk about throughout the day, but those are the main batch. That's the news. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. So Jamarl, you kind of gave an indication, but yeah, where do you want to get into specifically? Where are you going with your monologue?
So I want to start basically where we left off talking. Like you said, the Republican Party gave a law and order speech, meaning that there's going to be law and order for every American, which is somewhat of an astonishing statement considering you have right-wing child soldiers murdering 2 people, maiming 1, and absconding back to his home in Illinois. That is on top of protests that are taking place in state after state, multiple states at this point, many of which at this point have become violent. The cops and, in some respects, the protesters. Now, most of them, of course, are peaceful, but you have a batch that gets rowdy, and that batch that gets rowdy is, let's be honest, the cops were there bashing heads. The cops were there throwing tear gas and all of this other stuff. And the response, to some degree, created an escalation where you have just now chaos. Whether you talk about Kenosha or, for that matter, whether you're talking about Portland. You can't make a statement or make a speech that there's going to be law and order in Republican America when you have a world that is in flames in a Republican America. Let's also be very clear what took place. A 17-year-old, well, let's start at the beginning. Another unarmed black man gets shot, Jacob Blake. Blake gets into a scuffle with the cops, and Blake does his best to try to get back to his car. And Blake trying to get back to his car, one of the cops grabs him by the shirt and puts 7 bullets in his back. Now, that cop said that he had a knife that is in or under the car mat or whatever, that he had already told them about. Did they know he had kids in the car? Did they honestly believe that he was running to the car to have a gunfight with 3 children in the car? I'm making the point that if there is any rational action that could take place outside of taking that man's life, then that cop should be held responsible for it, because it should matter. But it doesn't, because 99% of the people in this country, or 99% of the killings by cops, the people walk. In Jacob's case, he lived, but he's paralyzed. We have no idea on whether or not he is going to walk. So there are protests. Zero tolerance. You've killed enough of us, zero tolerance. And that seems to be the way it is going. Those protests are burning cars. Those protests are apparently rowdy, in some cases violent, in some cases peaceful. You always get the duality, right? The cops, in this case, are there supposedly to put down the protests. That's their jobs, right? A 17-year-old with a cop fetish, right-winger, standing in Donald Trump's audience at one point, he's caught. He goes to Kenosha. Now, why is he going to Kenosha? Does he think this is a video game? Does he think this isn't serious? Does he think that these people that are angry and pissed off because another one of them had been murdered, does he think that that's something that's just playful? He goes willingly with a weapon, puts himself in the middle of violence. 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse, Antioch, Illinois. He goes and gets into a scuffle. He falls. And like every other coward that gets into a scuffle where they're getting beat up, his weapon that he has on him, he fires. Kills. Fires again. Kills. Fires again. Maims. He gets up. Cal, 17-year-old Chow soldier at this point, Chow warrior, representing the cause of the right wing, walks with his gun to the cops. They've just had a murder. They just had shots. And this child is walking with his gun. No issue at all, calm as all get out. And the cops, who gave them water earlier in the day, lets him pass. Not only lets him pass, Cal goes home. Now the cop picks him up, apparently, the day later. Listen to the police chief. Listen to the police chief. Let's play the clip. This is the police chief struggling to call a child soldier what a child soldier is.
Persons were shot. Everybody involved was out after the curfew. I'm not going to make a great deal of that, but the point is the curfew's in place to protect. Had persons not been out involved in violation of that, perhaps the situation that unfolded would not have happened. So the last night, a 17-year-old individual from Antioch, Illinois, was involved in the use of firearms to resolve whatever conflict was in place. The result of it was 2 people are dead.
What you're struggling to call it is murder. He killed 2 people. What are you talking about? Firearms involved. And you're telling me about a curfew? He was out after curfew. He was getting water bottles from your force earlier in the day. He probably felt, hey, I'm a part of this. These guys just gave me water bottles. I love cops. This is great. What did he think it was? Did he think that those people out there protesting the murder of another African American, did he think that that was fun? Did he think that was going to be a video game? My 17-year-old niece, cousin, whatever, was playing Xbox. He might have been shooting people on that Xbox, be it sense enough not to brandish a weapon, go out with that weapon, involved in an altercation with that weapon, then fire that weapon, murdering people with that weapon, and then absconding back to Illinois, walking past the cops. Nothing to see here, folks. And then the chief that catches him struggles, throat to get out, that this child is a murderer, that this child, on his own volition, crossed state lines, involved in an altercation on his own volition, fired on his own volition. All of that stuff was agency that he was entirely involved in. Now, you can make an argument that those people shouldn't have been protesting. I think that's insane. Protesting is American as apple pie. You can make an argument those people should have been rioting. That's another conversation. And I would even say, in some cases, maybe you're right. In some cases, maybe you're wrong. It depends on what you believe as a philosophy in regards to how things change and whether or not peaceful protests are there explicitly to get ignored. That chief should be ashamed of himself. But that chief has other fans. Let's hear Tucker Carlson. Tucker Carlson, who is justifying, in real terms, a child with all the agency in the world that decided all of these things that ended up in murder. Let's hear Tucker basically back that police chief up.
Everyone could see what was happening in Kenosha. It was getting crazier by the hour. So are we really surprised that looting and arson accelerated to murder? How shocked are we that 17-year-olds with rifles decided they had to maintain order when no one else would?
How shocked are we that a child would decide that he needed to keep order? I'm pretty shocked by that. I'm pretty shocked that a 17-year-old would find it is perfectly rational to get involved into a conflict that it is impossible for him to grasp and understand at that age, especially in the way that it digs in various members of their society. I suppose he thought that the gun was going to stop anybody from engaging him, that the gun in and of itself would have been enough to keep those people off. Let's be clear. That child is a civilian. That civilian is engaging other civilians. That child has no legal right, has no philosophical right. He has nothing, not even the law, to back him up in doing that. The only thing he has to back him up is that gun. And that is exactly what he ended up using. And understand what that also means. Escalation. If you're going to have gangs of right-wingers jump out of pickup trucks with the notion that they're working with the cops and they're going to be with the potential to murder, you will have an escalation by definition. That escalation takes place if the United States put weapons in space and China and Russia responds by doing the same, because ultimately they don't want to be subordinate to what they consider to be force that is used by you. Besides, what is he going to do? I'm going to burn this car. Well, I'm going to shoot you in the face if you do. Burn the car. Shoot in the face. Is that just? You may dislike the burning of the car. The shooting the person in the face doesn't get a pass. This is kind of my point. You have child soldiers doing this work, with Tucker giving an applause and the police chief not necessarily able to even call murder, murder. I understand the cops' point of view is, we want to keep order. But let's just be clear, order without justice doesn't work. Stop the murders. Deal with the issues of near zero accountability for those murders. Legitimately deal with the issues of poverty that incentivize rational crime and violence with the exponential bonus of undermining the need for cops in the first place. This is not magic. Apparently, there's a lot of people out there that believe that no justice, no peace just sounded good. It was just a phrase in the 60s. This is ground into what it means to be a human being. If there is any persistent aspect of us that can be considered part of the software, part of the human nature, per se, is the deep regard for deficits and justice. The comfortable in our world will wag the finger at the protesters. The comfortable will raise their voices against the response, never quite grasping in real terms the precursors or having any real sense of emergency with the precursors. They have a sense of emergency with this. Yeah, because things are burning. People ask, what do they want? It's clear. Black Lives Matter. It is implicit in the statement itself. I guess gave you what they wanted, just exponentially. And none of that is beyond the pale. All of that is part and parcel of what it means to be a human and part of the social contract. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. By Any Means Necessary is your guide to the movement and efforts shaping the world around us, from mass incarceration.
No longer am I interested in or concerned with prison reform.
It was a pretty punishing disregard for the sanctity of human life, that unleashing water cannons on peaceful, prayerful water protectors.
From efforts to protect the environment.
The climate movement is ready to, with plenty of opposition research and force and strength, along with, the right of both science and morality, to fight them on this.
To the movement for Black Lives.
When I first saw the Michael Brown video, and I saw that it clearly contradicted the narrative put forth forth by the Ferguson Police Department and by police supporters in general, 3 words came to mind. Color me shocked.
Stay tuned to By Any Means Necessary, 5 days a week here on Radio Sputnik. Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're taking calls, 202-521-1320. That's our phone line. Please call in. We were having some problems like last week, but our phones are, earlier this week actually, but our phones are working again perfectly. And you should be calling, 202-521-1320. Jamarl, you were talking about Kyle Rittenhouse, a 17-year-old arrested who killed 2 people, shot one other.
I saw the video. Have you seen the video?
Come back in. I have. Have you seen the video? Well, I've seen a couple of videos.
Okay.
I've seen Kyle. It depends on which one you're talking about. I've seen a few angles
It's like
of the shooting, and
it's a lot of them. It's the one where
Tucker
he's
Carlson
the
too.
shooting. It's also the one where he goes and goes to the cops and just kind of leaves.
I want to figure out how the first shooting happened, because that sets up the dominoes for the others. It's hard to tell. Here's the thing.
I see. So there's a fight. Apparently, he's chased. He gets into a scuffle. He falls to the ground. He has his gun on him. When he falls to the ground, he shoots.
No, I know. No,
he
but
turns
those
around.
Are the second but those are the second two. There was a first shooting that sort of set these off, and some people are saying that he was the aggressor in that, but I've heard other people saying that the other guy was the aggressor in that. And as far as I can tell, we do not have video of that first incident. And
well, the second shooting, then. That means that the person who was chasing him was chasing him because he just shot somebody.
Well, but yeah, who was the first person that he shot, and why did he shoot them? Was it self-defense or was it aggression? That's what I want to know. And ultimately, that
what I'm asking.
Matter in some cosmic
Go ahead,
sense.
Shane. I'm sorry.
But yeah, no. That ultimately, the thing is that matters for his trial. That matters for him, and that matters in some sense optically how we're looking at this. But so much of it is already set in stone. So much of what culture makes of itself has already happened around this story, because the event has happened and people have had responses to it, and nothing that factually happened will change the responses people have already had. It's just the record that people have seen. Either way, whether he's completely guilty or completely innocent, I don't know that there can be one either way.
This is the Trayvon Martin thing again, right?
It matters for him.
I'm not sure it does.
I mean, very much for him.
With Trayvon Martin,
you shouldn't have been out there. But Jamal, I wanted to respond to your monologue. There was a bunch of stuff that I wanted to say in response to your monologue.
Go for it.
You were talking about Tucker Carlson. I don't think that Tucker Carlson was trying to justify that kid going out there. I can go back and read exactly what he said, and I've listened to the clip too. I don't think that's what he was saying. I think he was saying it should be predictable that young people specifically are going to go out and do stupid things like this. That when we have this constant conflict, like you're saying 17-year-olds shouldn't be out there. There is nothing that 17-year-olds like more than getting into conflicts they don't understand and aren't prepared for. Seriously. I mean, the wave of school shootings, just that should set you up sort of on a subliminal level that this kind of thing is gonna probably happen, and pretty quickly. You have a right-wing militia. Like, we didn't know exactly who was the person who had shot this stuff, but you had the quote-unquote right-wing militia that had come out there to quote-unquote protect businesses. I don't know exactly how that stuff went down on the street. But my point is that back and forth, that ebb and flow and dialectic or whatever that's going on, you've been seeing that build up for weeks now, starting in Portland, arguably. Maybe it's been building up for months. I'm not going to say where it started, but you've seen that. It's predictable. There's like a constant stream of evidence that this is going to keep going if we keep it going. And in that sense, this isn't at all surprising. But here's the thing: fundamentally, if you think that Tucker was justifying it, then I would think you would have to think that he approved of it. And I don't get any sense that Tucker Carlson approved of this kid running out here. I don't
couldn't say that on air.
But what's your sense, tomorrow?
Well,
what's up?
Tucker Carlson couldn't say that I approve of this child murdering people in there. He couldn't say that. I mean, that would be the last day he does his job.
That he does. But you get the sense that he does approve of it.
Yes. Look, Tucker Carlson gets out there on this platform, and he basically makes the point of saying it is infinitely foreseeable that a 17-year-old is going to go out and murder 2 people. What? Why is that foreseeable? Like, also, the idea.
That's not what he said. That's not what he said. That's literally.
What did he say? I mean, you just made the argument. I mean, Shane, words have meaning.
The result was that kill two people, but
Yeah, but what did he think? I guess my point is, if Tucker Carlson is arguing that nobody should be surprised with this kid going out and murdering two people, then how is that not the exact same thing that is infinitely foreseeable that this child will go out and murder two people? Okay,
that's not what
the
he said.
discrepancy is infinitely foreseeable versus why should anybody be surprised? But isn't that a
That's not what
mild
he said.
distinction? What did he say, Shane?
He said,
Give me the
I'm gonna
exact
quote,
verbiage of what Tucker Carlson said.
17-year-olds, he said, he wondered if people should be surprised, quote, that 17-year-olds with rifles decided they had to maintain order when no one else would, end quote. And I don't even think that
That's not
I don't
saying-
think he's looking at that either. I think he's saying that people shouldn't be surprised that it came to this.
Right.
And
right.
I think that people
That's not the same thing as foreseeable?
Because
Wait. Not being surprised.
Yeah,
It's not the same
yeah.
thing as foreseeable?
yes, it is. I mean, if you're going to be surprised by
Thank
something,
you. Then why are you arguing with me?
And-
I'm saying that Tucker Carlson is saying that basically it is foreseeable that this will happen. And I'm saying that's nonsense. I don't think it's foreseeable
Yeah, but he
that a
didn't say anything
17-year-old
about-
goes out with a weapon
He said-
and murders two people.
That's not what he said. It's the second part of the sentence. Decided they had to maintain order. He's not talking about it was entirely foreseeable that a 17-year-old was going to go out and murder two people, or even that's again. I don't know that that's if he's doing it in self-defense, is that murder?
Okay, well, let's say it this way. Let's take
Shouldn't
away a
have
few
been out
things.
there.
Let's
Like, I
say
can say that he should not have
justification.
been out there.
I'm talking about what Tucker Carlson said. If you agree with me that he said it is foreseeable that this happens, then I don't know what you're disagreeing with me on.
That it's foreseeable that that it would get to this point, but it's not. Again, you're making it about Tucker Carlson tacitly approving of a 17-year-old going out and killing
Take the
two
approval
people.
away. Fair enough. Take the
Same
approval away.
approach.
Get
And
rid
so
of the
you're-
approval. Get rid of the approval. Let's go with specifically what he said. Let's
Well, but-
get rid of the approval. You're right. Because I don't know what is in
Yeah,
Tucker Carlson's
yeah.
head. I think he approves, but I don't know.
Sure.
Foreseeable, though, is very point. What he's it is foreseeable that this happens. But what are we talking
that's
about
not-
happening?
Again, I think it's foreseeable too. This didn't surprise me. It like shocked me in the way that like seeing something horrible shocks you, but it doesn't surprise me in the sense that if I don't know if that makes sense, but if I'm going in to see somebody that I love in the hospital and I know that they're really sick and I haven't seen them in a while and I know that they're going to look really sick, I won't be surprised when I see them, but I might be shocked, and it would hit you in the core. In that sense, this kind of thing is entirely foreseeable, but it's still shocking, and I still don't think he should have been out there. I don't think any of
This
this should
didn't
be happening.
surprise you at all. A
But on the other
white
side of it,
17-year-old
It's-
going
it
into a
seems-
protest,
What's up?
killing two, didn't surprise you. It just shocked you.
No, it doesn't surprise me that he was there, and it doesn't surprise me that this resulted. Reading through the headlines, I'm not like, wow, I couldn't have seen that coming. I could have. Anybody could have. If you're looking out at what's going on, if you couldn't have seen this coming, I don't know where you were. I don't know if other people couldn't have seen this kind of thing. Again, haven't we had years and years and years of child mass shootings at schools? And haven't we had like substantial militia back and forth between the left and the right, building up over months and months and months and getting more intense with like almost daily brawls between the left and the
But
right?
the left
Like,
doesn't have a militia.
those things
Right
come
wings
together.
have militias. The left doesn't
Well,
have militias.
That's not a left-wing militia. What is Antifa if not a left-wing militia? If you have constant daily protests,
Antifa is a
and
bunch
those are
of
politically motivated
people
protests.
who come together out of this notion of fascist stuff or pushing back against fascism. I mean, but this is not a militia.
Yeah, but they're people coming
Right
together.
wingers get out there at paramilitary militias where they go train, where they go shoot, where they brandish weapons and guns and whatnot. They rolled up in pickup truck with weapons. That's not protesters didn't have guns. They did.
Okay, so I guess if the word militia might be too specific, I would just use the word cohort or something like that. You have opposite political cohorts or opposite political groupings, aggressive groupings that come together and fight in the streets on a regular basis. It's not shocking to me. I mean, it's not surprising. We've got calls though. We've gone back and forth on this.
Let's get to calls.
We're taking calls. We've got Michael on the line. I don't mean to cut the convo off, but I realized we're going back.
No.
and forth.
Let's get to callers. We can talk at any time.
All right, Michael. Mike calling in from Sydney. You're on. What's going on?
Yeah, hey guys. Sorry I haven't called in a while. I just found out actually I was unsubscribed to Fault Line, so I'll have to resubscribe. Doesn't surprise me with YouTube. But I think probably the most disturbing thing I think I heard about that was what the sheriff or whoever arrested the guy said, the chief of police. And it's the same with New Zealand. With the massacre that happened there, that guy was sentenced. and no one calls it massacre. But I mean, like, the chief of police sort of frames it as he was resolving a conflict. If someone's arguing with you, it's okay to pull out a gun, shoot them, and say, "I was resolving a conflict." It's just not on. I mean, and you want to talk about infinitely foreseeable. Well, isn't it infinitely foreseeable that if you go around murdering black people for generation after generation after generation en masse, and no one gets prosecuted for it, isn't it infinitely foreseeable that they would take up arms against?
Yes, it is. Yes, both sides of this, but that side is absolutely foreseeable too, and that's why I'm not taking sides. I mean, if you hear me, I'm trying to get people to stop taking sides because I see that entire process is corrupting the whole thing by which we could even get better. I don't know. Michael, I can hear.
Shane, are you serious? You're going to get people to stop taking sides?
Yeah.
What does that even mean?
Yeah.
I want people to unmoor themselves from their identities, or for that matter, and I don't mean identities in the sense of race. I mean in the sense of the things that are digging into them. And you want them to kind of just cerebrally deal with this. That never happens. Explain to me at any point in time what that happens. Well, and why is that even beneficial to happen?
When people come together to compromise, they by definition break down their sides. They create a bridge between their sides. And that's what I want to happen all over the place. I want more bridges.
Compromise demands a certain degree of accountability and demands that the other people legitimately deal with the issue. And that's not what's taking place.
And like I just said, I don't want people to stop having their own beliefs. I want people to come together so that they're not perpetually divided, fighting across these shelves, split by fault lines. That's exactly what I want to do. We've got another call.
I want the issue to be resolved from the standpoint of justice. That's what I want. I don't need faux unity or faux resolution. What I want is honest to God dealing with the undermining issues that create those things. And this, just trying to come together.
Unless you have justice. Yeah, you can't. It would be stupid to try to keep it going if you didn't solve the problem. So you need both an actual solution and people to come together to create that solution. So I want both of those sides. We've got Ingrid calling in from DC. Ingrid, you're on the line. What's going on?
It's pretty amusing to hear Jamarl talk about unmooring when yesterday he tried to corner Elbert Guillory into coming around to his position. Before I talk to Jamarl about today, I saw a wonderful video. I thought it was wonderful of Kenosha this morning. Yesterday, the part of the reason that there were very less disruption in Kenosha yesterday is because the feds have started to take action. One of them was earlier in the day arresting some of the people that drive one of those riot buses or riot food and feed people, and they just arrested them. That's it. So they weren't there. But this thing
they arrested people who weren't violent, who weren't protesting per se. They were feeding people.
And I'm cheering it on. And if you'd let me finish, Jamarl, Kyle, it was homicide,
Rittenhouse.
but homicide is not necessarily murder. It was all self-defense. And as far as the first killing, there is some video when they go into the dark between the cars. The man who was shot.
Ingrid, just to correct you real quick, Kenosha County authorities issued an arrest warrant for 17-year-old Kyle Rittenhouse of Antioch, Illinois, on Wednesday morning, charging him with first-degree intentional homicide. Okay, fair enough. You're right. It doesn't
matter what they charge him with. That's what they arrested him with. But the evidence is going to show that all of this is in self-defense. The first man, after throwing a brick at him and chasing him for a long ways across a parking lot, came into close quarters. We can't see exactly what happened, but that's when the gun went off. And it's the angle and the difference in the size of the two people and where he was hit. It seems like they were in close quarters. I'm going to guess possibly the gun just went off, after which other people, rioters, started to chase him. One of whom, the one that was shot in the arm badly but is alive, had a pistol in his hand. He was chasing him with a gun. It was completely self-defense. The other one that he shot, when Kyle was on the ground, hit him in the...
Ingrid, I'm sorry. We have to take this for a break, so we're going to have to deal with this in the next break.
Yeah.
You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault lines.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik.
Epidemics and pandemics could kill millions of people, and they actually did. Centuries ago, deadly outbreaks called the Black Death, the Plague of Justinian, and the Spanish flu ravaged countries, empires, and whole continents. Some of these diseases are still present around the globe. Others have become a thing of the past. Discover how these ancient and not so distant outbreaks from previous centuries differ from modern-day SARS, MERS, and coronavirus pandemics. Listen to our new series, Outbreak, the deadliest epidemics in human history, this week on Radio Sputnik.
Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and McPherson. We're joined for this segment by Dr. Guy McPherson, internationally recognized speaker, award-winning scientist, and the world's leading authority on abrupt climate change leading to near-term human extinction. He is professor emeritus at the University of Arizona, and his published works, by the way, include more than a dozen books and hundreds of scholarly articles. Dr. McPherson, thank you for joining us.
Thank you for having me on again. I appreciate the opportunity.
Yeah, appreciate you being willing to. Great to have you. We're talking about the consequences of global warming, more and longer lasting extreme heat and heavy rain. And we're talking about at least one side of that in the U.S. specifically, as Hurricane Laura hits the Gulf states, once in a century storm in that region. I'm just going to go straight to this. How would you situate that? How would you look at that coming from the perspective of somebody very concerned about climate change in this century, in the last century, going forward?
Two really important points need to be made here. The once in a century has become once in a decade. It wasn't that long ago that Katrina struck an area very near where this hurricane is going to make landfall. And that's one point. The second point is that we are already losing habitat for Homo sapiens at various places around the globe. We've long known that a warmer planet is a wetter planet, and we are seeing the consequences play out. So although I'm not surprised, I'm not particularly happy that we are losing habitat for humans on this planet, the only planet we've ever known, obviously, in terms of a place to live.
Guy, welcome to the show. Thank you for joining us, man. You've been I think I've had you on my show more than any other guest. So thank you for coming on.
Thank you, Jamal.
One of the reasons I wanted to have you on, it was twofold. One, I wanted to get you were telling me about how your point of view had created pushback of people who basically was against that point of view. And interestingly enough, though, your point of view has been more right. This doesn't look something like it's mild. It looks like something that it's pretty severe. I mean, we've had two hurricanes hit the same place at the exact same time. We have fires raging in California that dovetail within one another. And not to mention, you've had, if I'm not mistaken, the ice banks, I think it was either Greenland or the Arctic, that they are basically saying this will be ice-free within our lifetime. Those things are traumatic because that ice is turning into water and it's basically going to increase the sea level. You were right. Can you explain to us the pushback that you received at giving your pronouncements? I think you gave this like 10 years ago.
I think it was Robert Heinlein who wrote something like, being right too soon is politically inconvenient or culturally inconvenient, something like that. And that's how I feel. I was right too soon. It took most people quite a while to catch up to the evidence I was presenting. But bear in mind that the whole time I've been talking about loss of habitat for humans, the whole time I've been talking about the rate of change, how it's difficult for any animals to keep up with that rate of change, I've been presenting a message that is rooted in evidence. So it's not particularly surprising that people are starting to catch up because the evidence is becoming overwhelming at this point. And it's not just the rate of change, it's everything. It's too hot, too fast for vertebrate mammals, including humans, to keep up. So we shouldn't be particularly surprised, although we shouldn't be particularly happy about it either.
Guy, where did this?
Is there a
where
way
did
out?
this start?
Oh, question.
I suppose. Where did you? I'm curious. Where did you diverge from the scientific consensus? You're describing a process by which people are coming back, and the scientific establishment is looking not just at what you're saying, but looking at the evidence that you're citing, and coming to some of the same conclusions as you. So the boomerang is sort of swinging back around. But where do you think, and what were the differences of opinion when this was happening? Where did you start to diverge? What was that process like? And what did you see that nobody else did at the time?
Well, it was in June of 2012 that I posted an essay on my blog, guymcpherson.com. It's titled "We're Done," and it indicates that I knew at that time, based on the evidence, that we were headed for human extinction in the near term. And I cited a bunch of evidence that nobody else wanted to read or even consider. And I understand that. But I was just compiling evidence produced by other scientists. By this time, I was living off-grid in New Mexico. I was no longer on campus. I was 3.5 hours drive from the university campus. So I was compiling evidence put out by other people and indicating that this evidence suggested that we had triggered so many self-reinforcing feedback loops that we were not going to be able to survive this. And so, of course, when somebody tells you you're going to die, you resist. You think, I'm healthy, I'm young, I can't possibly die, I have my whole life ahead of me, and so on. And then you add to that I was talking not only about the death of a particular individual, I was talking about the loss of habitat and therefore the death of all individual human beings on Earth. So it wasn't a message that was well received, obviously, and there was a lot of pushback, none of it rooted in evidence, all of it rooted in personal character assassination. And I'm not particularly surprised looking back. I don't know that I would have done anything differently if somebody had told me when I was, say, 30 years old that I was going to die in the near term, that I only had a decade to live. I'm sure I would resist that message as well. And so here we have an entire society focused mostly on celebrity culture and the opinions of celebrities rather than being focused on evidence. We shouldn't be surprised that the majority of people are unable to accept the fact-based information that I was presenting.
They might not have been able to accept it,
That's
but
interesting.
yeah, that is interesting. And I guess that is a fair point, right? If you come out with information too soon, people can't necessarily grasp it and frame it. And you're talking about something that's existential. Is there any do you see a way out? And I'm thinking that you don't, but technology is humanity's Thanos glove, right? I mean, whether or not we can necessarily figure it out right in the moment. I mean, we were able to go to the moon, despite the fact Kennedy wasn't necessarily didn't know how he was going to do it. Isn't this similar? Isn't this a technological issue from the standpoint of the mechanics of our climate and our environment? And it's just something that we as human beings, if at the very least we acknowledge, at this point, I don't even think we fully honestly acknowledge it, but if we acknowledge it, there is a pathway potentially for a technological solution to find our way out.
Well, it could be. I mean, technology is what got us into this mess. So that makes me a little pessimistic. But I am working with a scientist at Harvard by the name of Ye, that's Y-E, Tao, T-A-O. And Dr. Tao is heading up a project focused on reflecting sunlight back into space at a very large level. Now, this will require the financial input from people like Jeff Bezos and Warren Buffett and Bill Gates and so on. And so I've been trying to connect people like those, the big money people, to Dr. Ye Tao's lab. And so far, unsuccessfully. The project is called MIRRORS.
Is this the project that is putting mirrors in space?
No, it's a project that's putting mirrors on land, which is a heck of a lot easier than putting mirrors in space. And specifically because much of the land is dominated by ocean instead of terrestrial surfaces, it's proposing to put mirrors in the ocean in a way that they would be relatively out of the way when it comes to things like shipping lanes and our everyday life. So I think that's the only route forward that I've come across. And so that's why I continue to work on developing a potential solution. Do I think it'll work? No. I think it's a Hail Mary pass, but that's what we thought about going to the moon too. So I think this is the equivalent of going to Mars with 7.8 billion people. But I still think it's worth a shot because I think it's the only shot we have.
Dr. McPherson, last time we were on, we were talking about a couple of other solutions. We were talking about seeding the skies, aerosols. We were talking about iron fertilization in the ocean, plankton fertilization. There are other things. This is one that's on that list. There are a bunch of different options. When you were on last time, you were describing how you were interested in this option, at least in part, because it had been vetted by the scientific establishment. Can you go a bit deeper into that? What about this project for you distinguishes it from other potential avenues?
Two things. It's technologically straightforward, tested, and inexpensive. And second, the other alternatives have already been described and discussed in the scientific literature and have been found to be wanting, to say the least. For example, spraying the skies has been presented, discussed, and largely debunked by the National Academy of Sciences of the United States and a European body of similar stature. That was back in 2015. So we've been talking about spraying the skies for a long time, and it appears that it is not a viable way forward. With respect to seeding the ocean's iron filings in the ocean, that was tried by a rogue scientist several years ago, and it had the opposite of the intended impact. So it also violates international law, by the way. So I think the MIRS project offers a way forward that is legal, relatively inexpensive, and can be implemented very, very quickly, unlike the other approaches. So that's, in my mind, those are the advantages to the MIRS project. And if I see another idea that meets those criteria that can be implemented quickly with relatively little money, and here we're talking about, obviously, still a lot more money than you and I have in our checking accounts, but it's still feasible, it's still viable that we can get people with real money, people like Gates and Bezos and Buffett and so on, to contribute to the project, then we could actually get it off the ground in a relatively short order, like within weeks or months instead of decades.
All right, let's take a break and bring you back, because I want to discuss that very specific point about getting the rich to help. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. This is Guy McPherson, internationally recognized speaker, award-winning scientist, and the world's leading authority on abrupt climate change. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines.
Tune in every Thursday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for a regular segment called Criminal Injustice about the most egregious conduct of our courts and how justice is denied to so many people in this country. Tune in to Loud and Clear this Thursday and every Thursday for thorough and independent analysis of our criminal injustice system.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I'm here with my co-host Shane Stranahan. Joining us is Guy McPherson, internationally recognized speaker, award-winning scientist, and the world's leading authority on abrupt climate change. Now, Guy's been on my channel multiple times, and I've always enjoyed these conversations. Fascinated by him, actually, and I've learned a lot from him. Guy, there's something that you said that bugs me, though, that we need to get trillionaires or billionaires, the Bezos, the Gates, the Waltons of the world, to basically contribute. If the world is at stake, and I think maybe this is part and parcel to my own cynicism of us doing anything about this, the world's leading person on abrupt climate change is thinking of this in terms of dollars and cents, and thinking of this in terms of going to the rich and begging them, as opposed to the world is at stake, we're taking it. Your money means less than any of this stuff, and the fact that you got the money in and of itself came from basically a rigged, corrupt system that catered to them. This is not a situation where we need to beg, right? I mean, this is a situation where either taxation or, for that matter, appropriation from governments around the world to make this work. I mean, basically what we're talking about is an extinction level event. Talking in dollars doesn't necessarily seem to compare. Am I wrong on that? am I missing something on that? I mean, you're talking about basically the end of human existence.
Yes. In general, I agree with you. And I opted out of the monetary system on May 1st, 2009. That's when I decided it was the monetary system that was driving us to extinction. It's the monetary system that is emblematic of all the difficulties we have with this entire society. So I walked away from that set of living arrangements to the extent I could. Obviously, people around me still wanted to get paid for services they were providing. So I lived off grid for a decade. I finally realized that we are screwed no matter what. And so I came back to this country and this set of living arrangements to try to promulgate my message more effectively than I was able to do living off grid, for example, in New Mexico and Western Belize. So in general, I agree with you, but time is of the absolute essence here. This is not a moonshot. This is a moonshot on a moon that's trillions of miles away. We don't have time to implement a tax to get this project off the ground. We don't have time to get the various countries of the world to gather together as an international body and pitch the money. We've been doing that for 25 conference of parties talking about climate change. 25 years we've been trying to get governments to take action and corporations to join in, and it's been an utter failure. What I'm suggesting at this point is there are relatively few people who I detest, every one of them, don't get me wrong, but who I think if we're going to make this happen, we must involve those people because they have the ability to contribute the money and the technological power and the opinions that sway people into heading us in the right direction very, very quickly. You know, I mentioned last time I was on this show that it could very well be that we will lose habitat as early as this fall because of loss of aerosol masking as a result of COVID-19. And I've published a couple of papers on that topic in the peer-reviewed literature indicating how that could play out. So I think that's a real possibility. That means we have to start right now, that we have to start 10 years ago, and it's too late to start 10 years ago. We simply don't have time for more international meetings, for more international lack of collaboration, or more congressional activity to get the ball rolling. We need to have these people give me trillions of dollars the day before yesterday so I can get started on this project because I think it's the only way forward. That's it. End of story. I'm not a fan of the sociopaths who are pulling the strings of empire. I think they're detestable human beings. And I'm perfectly willing to use them and their money as needed in a crisis situation.
Guy, I want to get back to actually something you brought up a couple of times here, which is describing how you've lived off the grid for over a decade at this point. I'm guessing that relates to some of your deeper convictions about climate change, but also about the world's ecological systems. You're talking about the MERS project. You're trying to raise funds for that. I'm also curious about sort of deeper grassroots, ground level, foundational stuff that it seems to me like most people can do. Obviously, the pushback here, I'm talking about stuff like gardening, things like permaculture, moving to your own property, doing that kind of thing. Obviously, the pushback there is it's insignificant. I'm curious, though, what is your perspective on that topic? What is your take if people want to do that? You're describing an imminent death, basically. And so on the one hand, It might be moot. On the other hand, it might be just a sort of brief, selfish last bit. Or it could be some part of a replacement system, assuming optimistically, as I still do, of course, that you're wrong and that we're going to be okay. We're going to deal with some serious problems, but we're going to get through them. What's your take on that issue, though? What's your take on sort of this whole homesteading, self-sufficiency, gardening, and back to the land movement that certain people undergo every couple of years in the States and around the world here?
Right. I'm a huge fan of doing what you love to do. And if going back to the land is what somebody wants to do, then yes, please, because our time is limited. Even if I'm wrong, by the way, our time is still limited. Each of us is not going to, the odds against any one of us exceeding 100 years of age are astronomically small. So that means that we don't have long, regardless of whether I am correct or not with respect to timing. So I'm a huge fan of people doing what they love. And I moved off grid and it turned out to be a catastrophic failure, most importantly with respect to the relationships in my life and my ability to influence other people, which I would still be able to do to a much greater extent were I still on campus. So that was a mistake from my perspective. Is a mistake from somebody else's perspective? It might add a few days or a few weeks to your life. It might even add a few months. And if you love to do that, please, by all means, go for it. I'm not trying to discourage anybody from doing what they love, even if it doesn't add more than a few days. Look at the lengths some people will go to during their dying time in a hospital. Some people will spend millions of dollars for an extra day or an extra few hours. So obviously life is important to those of us who are living. So who am I to say you shouldn't do this or you shouldn't do that? I'm still a big fan of people growing their own food. You know, had we been warned about this by governments and corporations early enough, perhaps we could have headed it off. Perhaps we could have lengthened our run on the planet by having victory gardens, as we did during World War II, for example, when approximately half the food grown in the United States was grown in people's yards, on their own personal properties or on their rental properties. So, yes, that might be a way forward. I don't think so. From a scientific perspective, it looks like that won't work. But I'm not here to tell anybody what to do. I'm giving people suggestions based on what I've done, and mostly what hasn't worked for me. If you learn from your mistakes, then I must be among the most learned people on the planet.
You know, the thing is, though, from my own experience, the moment that you do something else or isolate yourself, it does become difficult to influence people who are in a completely different mindset. Like, if you're off the grid, they're not. So, in their heads, I'm playing Xbox, I'm going to the movies, I'm going to do this. They have what they consider the dramas of their life. And to be fair, there's no absolute right. Like you said, everybody dies. Everybody's going to hit their head on the ground at some point and end their life. And so you have a limited amount of time whether the world is going to end or not. And in such, it boils down to almost the same thing of living your life. So I agree with you on that. But I think the thing that it's funny, and I always love it, because you're right. Mistakes are the things that allow you to learn. And it allows you to learn at a gut level way, not necessarily from an intellectual standpoint. If you had to impart one of those lessons, there's this great video with what is the guy? He was working in the Vietnam War under LBJ, and he started to have mental issues and everything else. But he goes into the lessons of his life. What would be the lessons of yours that you would consider, okay, this is the highest, whether it's professional, whether it's something or not? Because I think you've had a very interesting life, and you've come to very interesting conclusions, especially when you accept this notion the world is coming to an end. What would you tell people?
Yeah, that obviously has been the most important lesson of my life. I learned when I was, theoretically I learned when I was about 11 that I'm going to die. My grandmother died, and I cried for weeks. I barely knew the woman. I'd only seen her a few times. She lived a long ways away. And so I cried, and it took me a few years to realize that I wasn't crying for her. I barely knew her. I was crying for me. That when I reached 11 years of age and I saw my grandmother die, that it reminded me that I too was going to die. That's the most important lesson I've learned. A lesson from Stoicism, that we are all going to die, that we don't have long on this planet, and so embrace our fate, love our fate, love the fact that we are here to experience the whole thing. Is it the end? We'll see. If it is the end, we got to be here for the end of the movie, as it were. We got to be here for the end of the show. We don't have a lot of control over many, many things that happen to us or even enabled by us. We just end up having this interesting life, as you put put it. And all of us have interesting lives. All of us are living in interesting times. And why would we not accept that as our fate, as our path, as whatever is coming? So amor fati is a Latin phrase that Stoic philosophers use. It means embrace your fate. Embrace and love your fate. So why would we not do that? We get to be here after all, and the odds against that happening are really astronomical. The odds, we know a lot about DNA. We know a lot about the universe. We know that the odds of us being here in physical form exceed the odds against plucking a single atom from the entire universe at random. So, and yet against impossible odds, or so it seems, here we are having a conversation about an existential crisis. Who'd have thunk it? So I find that amazing, and that's the most important thing I learned is to amor fati, love your fate, accept your fate, live going forward as if this is what was always supposed to happen to you. I don't even believe in supposed tos. But there you have it. I love where I'm at, what I've done. Many mistakes have been made. I've pointed the way for many people, mostly through my mistakes of the things not to do. And I love all of that at this point. It's taken me a long time to get here, but I'm finally in a position where I am loving my fate and loving the life that I've had. And to be fair, it's been enormously privileged. How many people could live for 11 and a half years without a paycheck? So that's been great. Don't get me wrong. I've been incredibly privileged, mostly because I'm a heterosexual Caucasian male of a certain age. But all of us are incredibly blessed and incredibly fortunate to be here at all in physical form. Embrace it, live it, pursue it, do what's right, do what you love. I don't know how I can say anything better than that.
Sounds like, yeah, amor fati fits. It sounds like amor fati and memento mori. Something like that, that combination. Love your fate, and then remember that you will die. And hopefully, if you love your fate, knowing that you'll die, you'll live a good life. Words I don't quite understand yet, but hopefully the years will help. That was the voice of Dr. Guy McPherson. Dr. Guy, thank you for joining us. He's an internationally recognized speaker, award-winning scientist, and the world's leading authority on abrupt climate change, leading to near-term human extinction. He's professor emeritus at the University of Arizona, and his published works include more than a dozen books and hundreds of scholarly articles. You can follow Dr. McPherson on Twitter. I'm going to spell this out a little bit. Guy_McPherson. So it's the word Guy, just spelled like that, underscore the character, and then McPherson. That's on Twitter. Also, GuyMcPherson.com, spelled the same way. We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
You're listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
Live from the divided states of America, welcome to your daily inoculation for propaganda. In the left corner, I am the indefatigable, ever vigilant, the last antibody to a sick and seizing political system, your political analyst, Jamarl Thomas.
And in the politically independent corner on the west coast of the United States and on the left side of my brain, I am independent political analyst and radio talk show host Shane Stranahan.
You are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Let's get to the headlines and the news. Milwaukee Bucks decided to boycott their playoff game following the shooting of Jacob Blake by Kenosha police. Now, this is not a boycott. By technical definition, this is a strike. Call it what it is. This cascaded into a wave of strikes across the American sports scene by Wednesday night. Soon after the Wisconsin-based Bucks decided they wouldn't play, the NBA announced a postponement of Game 5 of 3 different playoff series. Bucks versus Orlando Magic, Houston Rockets versus Oklahoma City Thunder, Los Angeles Lakers versus Portland Trail Blazers. Hours later, 3 WNBA 5 Major League Soccer, 3 Major League Baseball games were all called off as athletes acted in solidarity with the Bucks and decided to strike. It's not a boycott. Call it what it is. If you're not using your labor and you decided to withhold that labor, that, by definition, is a strike. Kenny Smith also walked off the set of T&E for the sake of solidarity. I have never seen anything like that in sports. Beautifully breathtaking. Since the inception and spread of COVID-19 virus in the United States, new research estimates that more than 12 million Americans have lost their employer-based health insurance, according to new research. Quote unquote, because most U.S. workers rely on employer or family members' employer for health insurance, the shock of the coronavirus has caused millions of Americans their jobs and their access to health care in the midst of a public health catastrophe, according to Josh Bivens, the Director of Research at the Economic Policy Institute. Trump supporter and cop sycophant Kyle Rittenhouse, a 17-year-old from Antioch, Illinois, was arrested later Wednesday morning and taken to Lake County Juvenile Detention Center near Vernon Hills in conjunction with the killing of 2 and injuring of 1 at the protest in Kenosha, Wisconsin. An extradition hearing has been scheduled for Friday, and we will be following that story. UMass Lowell poll has lefty Ed Markey 52% and Joe Kennedy 40%. This particular race is that much more interesting because the DCCC and the DSCC created rules to blacklist all companies that work with candidates to take down incumbents. This did not in any way stop Pelosi, however, from backing Kennedy or those organizations from ignoring that rule. Night 3 of the Republican convention last night, with Vice President Pence giving a 37-minute speech warning Americans that they won't be safe in Joe Biden's America and telling them that Trump administration will have law and order on the streets of this country for every American. Hurricane Laura was a Category 4 on landfill with surges as tall as 20 feet and banned along the Louisiana coast. It has been called the region's strongest storm in over a century, and it's effectively hit the state line between Texas and Louisiana, straight up that line. The Vermilion Parish Sheriff's Office asked people in the region to please evacuate, and if you choose to stay and we can't get to you, write your name, address, social security number, and next of kin and put it in a Ziploc bag in your pocket, praying that it doesn't come to this. Well, China has fired missiles in the South China Sea in response to the United States flying a U-2 spy plane into the region, while China was apparently in the middle of military exercises. Jeff Bezos has become the world's first $200 billion man. Second in place is Bill Gates with $123 billion. Jeff would have passed the $200 billion threshold earlier if it weren't for the recent divorce that left his wife, Mackenzie Bezos, with $60 billion. Most of the money comes from Bezos' ownership of Amazon, which is worth $1.72 trillion, behind Apple, which is evaluated over $2 trillion. The White House has announced the creation of 12 AI and quantum research institutes. And that is your news. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. I find all of this interesting. One of the stories that I did yesterday, Shane, I think you're going to get a kick out of this, is Don Lemon. Now, Don Lemon triggered, to put it mildly, talking to Andrew Cuomo. And he tells Cuomo, he says, look, Joe Biden needs to confront the killings and the protests. And he is very clear about it. His reasoning is not because cars were set on fire. It's not because people were being necessarily beat up. It's not because cops in cases were pulling people out of cars or stabbing tires. Nope, polling. It has to do with Joe Biden and the polling. Because in his mind, his rationale is that Joe Biden is being injured by people who don't necessarily like to protest. It's interesting as to why, though. Why would he say Joe Biden is directly affected by this? Is it because Joe Biden is getting the black vote? Is it because Joe Biden, in his mind, he doesn't necessarily believe Joe Biden doesn't want to rock the boat? And he looks at the protests as being, they killed a black person, they're black people protesting? You know, the guy that got shot was white. It wasn't just blacks. Let's hear Joe Biden come out and finally leave his basement and give a response. This is pretty quick, it's just a minute. Joe Biden, let's hear the clip.
What I saw in that video makes me sick. Once again, a black man, Jacob Blake, has been shot by the police in broad daylight with the whole world watching. You know, I spoke to Jacob's mom and dad, sister, and other members of the family just a little bit earlier, and I told them justice must and will be done. You know, our hearts are with his family, especially his children. It's horrible what they saw. Watching their father get shot. Like Gianna Floyd, they're asking why? Why daddy? Put yourself in the shoes of every black father and black mother in this country and ask, is this what we want America to be? Is this the country we should be? You know, as I said after George Floyd's murder, protesting brutality is a right and absolutely necessary. But burning down communities is not protest, it's needless violence. Violence that endangers lives, violence that guts businesses and shutters businesses that serve the community. That's wrong. In the midst of this pain, the wisest words that I've heard spoken so far have come from Julia Jackson, Jacob's mother. She looked at the damage done in her community and she said this, quote, "This doesn't reflect my son or my family. So let's unite and heal, do justice, end the violence, and end systemic racism in this country now."
End systemic racism in this country now. We got to end the violence. We got to end the rioting. Those cops, hey, that looks horrible. And then proceeds to use, as he typically does, those black families as props. I can't stand Joe Biden. And the more he talks about issues of civil rights makes me that much more annoyed. This sounded like a poor man's Obama. That basically, I'm going to tell you two things. Not reconciling either, but I am going to talk about those two things. And because I talk about those two things now, you can believe that I have something to do with it. I, Joe Biden, have just did something, and the world is great. That doesn't change anything. That doesn't only not change anything. You, Joe Biden, the fact that these are coming out of his mouth, the same man who, if you look back, created the criminal justice system. In many respects, the mean-spiritedness that was in the criminal justice system, coming from the top, came from Joe Biden. And he will give this wormy, smarmy speech that means nothing. Just saying words. Fact of the matter is, if Joe Biden got into office, it would be the same. And whether or not people forget this, it seemed that Don Lemon forgot this. Black Lives Matter was started under a black president. Those killings of cops of cops killing blacks was taking place under a black president. So this notion that King of Blacks, Joe Biden, and the words that he's saying here in any way has any real material substance to it is irrelevant. Joe Biden is trying to get elected, and he needs to confront both things. He doesn't want to burn either one. Ergo, the speech. Take a side. Pick a pony. Make your point clear. And I think this is the thing that annoys me about Joe Biden, whether it's him lying about being part of civil rights, whether it's this, living off him and rubbing himself in Obama reputation without necessarily wanting to take the faults of that administration. And honestly, at this point, just wanting to coast. I question, what would this speech be if this speech was given by Sanders? And how different would it be in regards to how it would address what's taking place? And whether you agree with him or disagree with him, I guarantee you he will take a side. And I don't mean this in this kind of BS way. I just mean when you earnestly agree with a particular position, not taking it for political reasons. What Joe Biden is doing here is splitting the baby, dancing between the raindrops, not entirely wanting to hurt or, let's say, err towards either side for, desire or for thought that it may injure his presidential campaign. How do you see this, Shane? Do you see this as being adequate? Do you see this as being something that, this deals with it? And going further, if Biden got elected, do you honestly believe that Joe Biden does anything real or material any more than Obama? Or for that matter, Clinton? Clinton actually did something material. He put people in prison, in cages for very long periods of time. Something that Joe Biden helped to do. How do you view this?
Well, we've been prioritizing rhetoric over reality for decades at least now. It's just surprising to me that we haven't gotten better at the rhetoric. It's so obvious. It's so obvious that's all that this is. I mean, I don't know. I look at these things again from this sort of wide level. I want to come back to the specifics. We're taking calls 202-521-1320. Way I look at this by default is we've been you have a split class where under democracy you're supposed to have like a tight one-to-one relationship between the interests and the beliefs, the commitments of the voters. and the actions of the government. However that happens, there should be as close to a one-to-one representation as possible. The people who are in charge the people who are, ostensibly in charge, leading the executive branches of the government, leading the judiciaries, whatever, people who are agents of the people, should be weaker than the people, and the people should overpower them. Of course, that's not true. The problem is, it seems like it's only within the past, 50 to 80 years in the U.S. that's become not true. It seems like we had a functional democracy at some point before that, where people were more or less engaged, and it seems like we become less and less engaged, and we're just not anymore. So they don't need to have it. I'm going back to rhetoric versus reality. There doesn't need to be any reality there. It can be just rhetoric. It can be, and it has been for a long time. We're not even responding to them as if, like, if Joe Biden came into your home and you were hanging out with him for a day. I know intimacy breeds contempt. There's that phrase, I'm paraphrasing, where you'd get used to him, and once you got used to him, once you started asking him questions about what he actually believed or what his history was, you'd quickly probably find out that you didn't trust him. You didn't like him if you were a Biden voter, you didn't like him nearly as much as you thought you did. What we're trained to do by default is to respond to the media complex on its terms, and instead of sort of interrogating the people that we see on the screens, we just sort of we sort of watch them talking with each other, and we think in the terms that they've provided for us, and that's dangerous. Yes, and it needs to stop. And all I can hope for is that we can help to stop it by talking reality with folks. We're taking calls 202-521-1320. That's my take, Jamarl.
That's perfect. I agree, 1,000%. I would add one thing, that sometimes people have gotten into such a weird spot that you have two parties. Both parties basically play off each other, meaning not entirely having an ideology of their own dealing with the public, but having an ideology that deals with basically cashing their constituents, who are people getting the cash. Because both parties can play with each other in this way, the public doesn't have a choice in the matter. Who do you go to if you only have two, and both tell you to kick rocks? And so Joe Biden gives rhetoric. He doesn't need to give substance, because substance wasn't necessarily something that was given anyway. I agree with you 1,000% on this one. I just think it's worse.
Well, here's another way to look at it. Why are we? Yeah. Why? Sorry, I'm sorry. Yeah, radio can be weird sometimes. I thought you were done.
No, I'm finished. No, I was done. I was done.
Okay, cool. Yeah, why is it that we're so focused on the two parties anyway? Why do we care about the fact that there are two parties? That's another way to look at this process. Like, if you want to make changes, I'm sure there are changes that you can only make nationally, but there are a bunch of changes you can make locally, including political changes. You can start to build up your local community infrastructure. You can start to get involved with people that you know. You can do it, and it can have absolutely nothing to do with the Democratic or the Republican parties. The problems come in when you're trying to fix problems nationally. But here's how I'll put it. If everybody in the United States, and this is obviously completely unrealistic, but if everybody in the U.S., let alone the world, started to get involved in politics locally, you within a generation, the Democrat and Republican parties would be unrecognizable if they still existed. And I believe that pretty gosh darn wholeheartedly. The problem is, what are the incentives? I don't know. That's for us to figure out. You got to solve your problems. Anyway, we're going into a break. 202-521-1320. We're going to be back in a second taking calls. Again, 202-521-1320. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be right back.
Fault Lines. Want to talk? Get in touch with us at radio@sputniknews.com.
What do we want?
News, politics, and culture.
When do we want it?
Wait, we weren't finished. News, politics, and culture without the red and blue spin.
Okay, so now when do you want it?
Daily from noon to 2 p.m. Eastern Time.
Okay, satisfied now?
Never. Tune into Political Misfits on 105.5 FM in Washington, D.C. and on 102.9 and 104.7 FM in Kansas City, Missouri. Daily for our analytical fix. No surrender.
Fault Lines.
And we're back, and we're taking calls. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, and you can reach us. You can talk to us, not just listen to us, by calling 202-521-1320. Again, 202-521-1320. We've got Tarif calling in. Tarif from New Orleans. Tarif, you're on the line. What is going on?
Good morning, gentlemen. I humbly disagree with the scientists that y'all had on today. It's an argument in the science field dealing with CO2, dealing with the Earth's rotation, dealing with the climate change. I heard both arguments, and I'm leaning towards CO2 is natural and is actually good for the planet. And we can deal with the situations by creating new technologies and whatnot. Now, he was saying
Now,
certain
Tarif,
things.
right, Tarif, real quick.
Wait, hold on.
When you say
Let me
CO2,
finish.
no, I'm not interrupting. I'm just saying I'm trying to understand. When you say CO2 is natural and is beneficial, okay, go ahead. I'm sorry. Finish. My bad. I'm interrupting.
Okay, CO2 is beneficial. Okay, they have greenhouses that you have plants in that they pump a whole bunch of CO2 to green them faster. Okay, now I'm not talking based on. I'm not a scientist, but what I do is I sit down, just like you, Jamal. We sit down and we look at different arguments. I take the pro and the con. Every time somebody comes with a theory, I got to take the pro and con. I look for the person's, another person that I say that disagree with that person. Say, well, I got evidence says this. So I came up with this years ago. Not me, but I started years ago dealing with the climate people, with scientists that was leaving the universities or retiring, was talking about, hey, CO2 is good for the planet. Then it's why some parts of the planet heating up is because you have other variables that we're still trying to investigate what's going on. All right, it's very complicated. You have people out here that's debating like what's his name, Dr. Craig Adiso. He's pro CO2, and he has charts to deal with this and all that. The doctor was saying that he's trying to get Bill Gates. They're trying to get these rich billionaires to finance these massive projects, but yet Bill Gates, he's for the climate change. He's been talking about this for years on TED. You have all these rich billionaires trying to push for the carbon tax. And it's usually the people that's pro CO2 usually get brownballed or get or have to finish their finish their professorate to come out and say they for CO2. So it's a debate still going on.
Quick question, Sharif. If it's not, quick question. What do you think it is if it's not what the overwhelming majority of scientists say, talking about greenhouse gases, CO2 being one of them? Because there's also methane, there's other gases. But I'm asking, what do you think it is that's creating the heating effect on Earth?
It's not just CO2. You have other variables. Like I found out about 6 months ago that you have water droplets. What is the water droplets? It's your cloud cover, okay? That's going in the air, and that also blocks the sun, and that also, heats up the environment too. You have other things dealing with, volcanoes, erupting, and you have volcanoes underneath the water, but they're not counting, So it's other variables. Then what I say, like last week, you got the sun. With the sun, the spinning of the sun, dealing with its solar cycle, the 11-year cycle. Then you got the higher cycles. Then you got the black spots that appear on the sun that cause a magnetic pulse to hit the Earth. That cause a magnetic. Something.
Now, Tarif, I gave you all sorts of time to make your point, and I appreciate your point. Look, the overwhelming majority of scientists believe climate change. Even ExxonMobil, I don't know if you remember this research, that they had their scientists look into basically what they were doing, and in the 80s came to the conclusion that what we were doing is causing climate change as greenhouse gases, a lot of them, and I think you should look at those charts to see where the greenhouse gases were back then in comparison to the overwhelming, insane amount that there is now. And in the Industrial Revolution, it's seeing how the temperatures have increased as those things have gone up. Now, you could say there's correlation, fair enough, but you can do this in a lab. I mean, it's even foreseeable. If you look, water is healthy for me. If I drink too much of it, I will also die. The same thing you can say of vitamins and all sorts of things. There are plenty of things that in adequate amounts are perfectly okay. That when you start taking them in higher amounts, they become not so okay, and they start damaging that particular system, whether it's physical or whether it's habitat.
I think that's a good metaphor. Yeah, that's a good metaphor. We've got to go to other callers. I wanted to respond to this real quick. I'm not a scientist, and I'm pretty sure Jamarl isn't either. My understanding of this, though, I mean, CO2, methane, both of the ones you mentioned, Jamarl, those are both sort of carbon-centric molecules. Methane pretty much entirely, it's one carbon, 4 hydrogen. CO2, 1 carbon, 2 oxygen. Anyway, carbon in both of those. Obviously, central constituent of life. And then if you look at the other atoms in those molecules, it's oxygen and hydrogen, which together make water, So none of these are it's not like these are inherently dangerous atoms. Literally, carbon, the building block of life, and then water, fundamental to life too. It's just the way that these things are arranged and the chemical composition of this stuff. CO2 is useful for plants. They need carbon to grow in the same way that methane is useful for plants if it's digested, basically, if it's converted into a form that they can use it. I think part of the problem is that maybe two people do fixate on CO2 a little bit too much. Maybe that's the sort of simple, easy hook to understand. But there are a lot of other problems that in conjunction, like you have a combination of deforestation, desertification, lack of water. You're not getting plants to grow. You don't even have plants in a lot of areas that can take that that carbon in, that can take that CO2 in, which would normally be the reparative mechanism. It's that humans over the course of hundreds, and some people would say thousands or tens of thousands of years, have dramatically reshaped the land masses of the earth and even the oceans. And in the process, we've just caused this massive, massive habitat change that might come back to strike us. And Guy says it is, and very soon, and mortally. I disagree with that last part. But you're also, you are right, Tarif. There are a bunch of other factors here too. But I don't know. Call back and we can keep having a conversation about it. This is an interesting topic because once you start to get to disagree about it, you get into science, which is like some people find it boring, but it's the fundamental fabric of the reality of facts, how it all works.
Yeah, but
anyway,
it's like arguing about gravity. It's like somebody saying gravity, or the moon is made of Swiss cheese, and you're like, dude, the moon is not made of Swiss cheese, and it's like, this is a great argument. No, it's not.
I don't think that's what he's saying.
I mean, look, wait a minute. To be fair, I don't consider the greenhouse thing as being as set as gravity or something like that. So don't misunderstand me. If science is falsifiability, they come up tomorrow and say this is BS. But
it is a complex system. It's a nonlinear system.
Yes, but by the time you get
it's that complicated. We've got to go to calls.
Yeah. Let's go to other callers. I massively disagree with that. I'm perfectly okay with the greenhouse model. Let's go. Who's next? Let's see. We have Adam in Colorado. Adam, 30 seconds. What's going on?
Morning, guys. So I want to push back on that think local idea. In the same way it doesn't work on climate change, it won't work in time for policy change regarding climate change as well as our other needs. And instead, we have to actually still target at the federal level. If you do not, then 15, 20 years is too late to actually deal with the issues, including as the permafrost melts, the release of massive amounts of methane that are known to actually kick up the temperature by multiple degrees Celsius. So
even worse than carbon, Adam. Yeah.
That are in play. We can't think just local. We have to think bigger, and we have to act bigger. We can't just take the time that we could back in the 90s to get there. We have to do something more.
Thank you, Adam. I agree with you 1,000%. Methane is worse, not to mention the water that's released into the seas that increases the. You disagree with that? Go for it. Why do you disagree with it? Oh, you probably disagree with the local part. Get into it. Go for it. Go for it.
I mean, he was pushing back against the localism thing. Yeah, I'm gonna push back against anybody who disagrees with localism in principle, unless you're getting into facts, and then we can talk about facts, and maybe I'll hear something I don't know. But that was just in principle, as far as I can hear. I'm not saying that we shouldn't try to act on a global scale. I'm saying that things have shifted way, way, way too far in that direction. And when you're acting on a global scale, but you only have local power, you're effectively in the land of oligarchs, which leaves you helpless. And that's not how I think people should be. So we should act where we have power, which is on the local scale, build up our power locally, and then that might give you a chance of shifting things globally. With climate change, though, of course, there are international problems that we need to coordinate on as nations, not just as communities, but like on the highest levels as nations to fix. COVID was one of them. Climate would be, improving the climate generally is a massive problem. One way of putting it is, though, is that there are a bunch of countries on the face of this earth who have individual incentives, who have their own incentives to fix their climate. So you look at countries like Saudi Arabia, pretty much any country on the Arabian Peninsula has huge climatic problems that have developed over the course of hundreds and thousands of years, both, hundreds and thousands of years, recently, a little bit more recently, and then deep into the history of civilization. They want to fix those problems, and they're hiring people to do it. So some countries around the world do have individual incentives, which might make some major changes in the long run if they're bringing their forests back and stuff. But there are also, we need more global coordination too. On the other hand, we need localism, and I'm gonna stand by that. We've got more callers. I think we should go to them. Next up, let's go. This is a controversial one. Let's. You know who you are. We're gonna skip you for now. It's complicated. Michael in Silver Spring. Michael, you're on the line. What's going on?
Yeah. I hate to be Debbie Downer, but I just want to mention that we shouldn't rule out the possibility that we're living in hell. I'm in a bad day. I'm having a bad day, but I mean, that's a possibility because. And then I just want to say that there's certain things like shortness of life. We don't live very long. The fact that, and then here's another thing. Why doesn't the media go out into the public at this time and then just interview people and see how they feel and talk it out? And then the solution to all these things is watching things now, videos. I don't know as much as reading or anything, just watch a video. So if the people are going into outer space and they have limited fuel, they have limited fuel on those spaceships. If they're actually going into outer space, what about a live stream? If the scientists are doing a COVID experiment or they're trying to figure out the vaccine, what about a 24/7 live stream with a dedicated channel where the entire planet can watch these scientists? Because you can't
Michael,
see a cell, ELL.
Just interrupt. Wait, Michael. Just interrupt for a moment. There is a live stream in space from the International Space Station. In fact, that live stream caught.
Yeah, exactly.
In fact, one of those live streams caught that spaceship that they couldn't identify. Where they were like, it was the ICC thing, and all of a sudden you see this craft, and the thing poops off some kind of poof of stuff and goes forward. People were like, whoa, what is that? That stream is up there, man. It has some fascinating stuff that is found sometimes. On the second point, the idea that we're living in hell. You can also make an argument, if you're going to make an argument that this is some kind of thing of hell, that this is also a classroom. Jeff Bezos is $200 billion. He's not living in hell. Nor are people who are doing extraordinarily well. People who get sick, don't get misunderstood. When I'm in a hospital and I'm throwing up blood every 30 minutes, that feels like hell to me, and I don't necessarily want to be there. When I'm outside of that and I'm on my show and I'm in the middle of an argument, it's going great. I feel like I'm in heaven. So this notion of heaven and hell to some degree is perspective of the individuals that are there, unless you're going to take the perspective that each and every individual is the only one there and that everybody else is not real except for you. And you are living in this particular simulation on your own, going through this particular struggle. And the other people who are going through struggles that are in, making $2 a day aren't really real. I guess I'm making a point to you that if you're going to go with that notion, you could say you're in a classroom. You could say that when you die, you wake up and you go into another class where you're maybe Asian, maybe a Vulcan or something else, where you're living those experiences to try to get a good grasp of what it means to be alive. All that stuff
Jamarl,
comes into play.
Jamarl, I'm sorry.
Yes,
yes.
We have to break.
Like,
you're right.
Like this. We got to go out. We've got to go into a break. We've got a pre-recorded segment. We don't have flexibility on this one. We've got to go into this pre-record that's a fixed length, so we've got to go out. We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines. We are above all the latest developments, and we don't take any sides. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Shooting from the lip.
We're taking no prisoners here. Real opinions for real people. Where we bring you people with controversial views, and instead of trying to catch them out, we actually let them expand on their views. What's going on in British politics, European politics, and indeed in world politics as well. And wherever you are, whether you're a UKIP supporter, a Tory or Labour, everything is in turmoil.
John Gaunt.
Shooting from the lip.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host, Shane Stranahan. And joining us, Miko Peled. Miko Peled is a human rights activist and author of The General Sun, Journey of an Israel into Palestine, and Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. Miko, again, thank you for joining us on the show.
Good to be with you guys.
Absolutely. So we have been paying attention and watching events that have been taking place in Israel, especially along the lines of some of the new negotiations that have taken place between Israel and the UAE, but more so in regards to what we consider to be, well, violence. And violence in the case of Palestinians, and injustice from the standpoint of Israel. Can you give us an update on what is taking place right now in Israel, especially under this notion of annexation? And you could say, I guess, the deal that the UAE is using, saying that annexation was part and parcel to the reason they came up with that agreement.
Sure, I'm happy to do it. You know, I just for to clarify, I usually prefer to call the country Palestine, even though it is occupied and it is governed by the state of Israel. The country itself remains Palestine, and the reason I do that is because when we call the country Israel, we're legitimizing the apartheid and the racism and the violence. So what we're seeing is, number one, we're seeing a criminal that is not reporting on the crimes of the apartheid regime that has been killing like a cancer all over Palestine for the last, best part of the last 100 years, over 70 years. So I think that's very troubling, and it's great to have you guys bring these things up and some of the other, alternative media outlets that do report on it. But we don't hear anything. The general public that is not familiar with the alternative media sources just don't know what Israel has been bombing Gaza very, very heavily every single night, and we're talking about a strip of land, which is a small part of Palestine, but you have 2 million people living without access to clean water, limited electricity, even in this very, very hot summer, which means disruptions in hospital operations. It means disruptions of life in general. We can't take for granted any of the things that we do. They can't take for granted any of the things that we do, not only because they're being bombed every single night, but also because they don't have regular access to electricity. Or medical supplies, or healthcare, or travel, and so forth. So, this is going on all the time. You don't see anything about this being reported. There was just a heroic march by Palestinian women, Palestinian mothers, whose children were killed in criminal activity. But when there's criminal activity within Palestinian communities, Israeli police does not intervene. So, of course, it makes it very easy for criminal elements to take over, and innocent civilians are being killed. And this is a very, very serious problem in the community of Palestinians who are citizens, who are also citizens of the state of Israel. Nothing is being reported. They marched halfway down the country, over 100 miles from the city of Haifa to Jerusalem, to the center of government. This was never reported. Nobody even talked about this. Nobody talks about the problem. It's a lot like what used to happen in South Central LA with drugs and violence that were being pushed into the community, by the authorities practically, and the authorities wouldn't intervene, and so on. So we have all this happening, and then we have these headlines, that suddenly Israel signs an agreement with the United Arab Emirates, as though this is some big deal. Israel's been doing business with these corrupt semi-state, semi-kingdoms, semi-princedoms, whatever the hell they are, for a very long time. And for a healthy amount of money and a healthy amount of arms sales, these people are willing to make peace with anybody, with the devil himself. So they throw the Palestinians out the window, and they make peace with Israel because Trump is promising them weapons. So that's really what is happening on the ground on a regular basis. And again, it's good that we have media outlets like you guys that are actually willing to discuss this and report this.
Miko, thank you for the compliment there at the end. I actually wanted to get into something that we haven't talked about with you. If you're okay with it, I'd just like to talk about your background. So we introduce you, human rights activist and author of The General Sun, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine. Again, we introduce you as the author of a book, the title of which is The General's Son. I know you were the son of a prominent Israeli general. That gives you a unique perspective on the military there, on the situation. That also makes you a unique voice in the Israeli political scene. But I don't know all that much more about your history. Would you be willing to get into that? If not, no worries. But I'd just be curious to hear. Granted all that.
Sure. Yeah, I'm happy to do it. Sure.
Great. Yeah, thank you. Yeah, I mean, I honestly don't know where to start. Where do you think would be a good place to start with understanding where you came to this, what your political perspective is now, where it was derived, and what you cared about, how you moved into that current stance?
Well, I'll just give you the spiel that I can normally give. I mean, basically, I was raised in a very patriotic, military family. My father was a general. He was among the young officer in the War of 1948, where Israel was established. Then he remained in the military, and he was among the generals of the 1967 war. And the 48 war and 1967 war really defined Palestine, because those were the two wars in which the state of Israel came to control all of Palestine. And then my father did something very interesting. After he retired from the military in 1968, he began talking about the possibility and the need more than the possibility, to start negotiating with the Palestinian people, to recognize the Palestinian people as an independent people who have the right to self-determination. And that is when this idea that we know today as the two-state solution was really born, where the idea is that there would be a Palestinian state in the West Bank and the Gaza Strip, Jerusalem will be their capital, and so on. Just for saying that, he was immediately branded a traitor, and he was ostracized and became an outcast. So from being this heroic military figure, highly respected, he suddenly became a traitor because he dared to speak about the Palestinians and to say the word Palestinians. But the problem with that solution, with this two-state solution, is, of course, that it's not a realistic solution. A state of Israel cannot recognize the Palestinians as a nation that deserves self-determination, because that negates the entire premise of the existence of the state of Israel, which is that Palestine, or what they call the land of Israel, belongs to all the Jewish people. You know what I mean? So if it belongs to all the Jewish people who live in America and in Europe and everywhere else, then what the hell are these Palestinians doing here, and who are they?
That is one of the stranger elements. I've been to Israel twice. Once I had the opportunity to go to Bethlehem and areas of Palestine, and I was shocked by the difference. Like Israel, honestly, if you're in Jerusalem, especially if you're in Tel Aviv looks like Beverly Hills. But Jerusalem looks like Little America to some degree. You cross over into Bethlehem and you look like you're in the middle of, nowhere. It's a drastic difference in the lifestyles and the living situation of the Palestinians versus otherwise. It's something you said else also that I want to highlight. You noted that there was a peaceful protest march that no one covers, meaning the only time Palestinians get coverage here in the United States, or you can say even in Europe, is when there's violence, not necessarily the peaceful marches that take place in those areas. Tell me something. You would probably know this far, far better than I would. I look at the Palestinians through the lens of an African American in America. One of the things that I do know is that situations of difficulty produce anger within the psyche of the people who are facing that difficulty, especially if they understand that it's injustice. What is the psyche, to some degree, of the Palestinians that are living in that environment, constantly in that environment? And is there no understanding or even approach at understanding how the state of Israel and the belligerence of that state towards those people of those indigenous communities, meaning people whose land they're taking, there's no regard for that at all? That's just a complete dislocation between the conditions that the people are being put in versus the belligerence of the state itself, and how the belligerence of the state creates those situations. Also, one last point. What's the end point? Where do they expect this to end? If they continue to take all the land, where do they expect the Palestinians to go?
I think that's a great question, and your perspective as a Black American man, I think, is very useful here as an African American, because the similarities, the parallels, there are enormous parallels, enormous similarities. I think the most obvious similarity is that both the African American community in America and the Palestinian community, which granted are indigenous to Palestine, and that's maybe the one difference, are incredibly peaceful communities. In other words, they're communities that have rarely engaged in any kind of violence throughout the history, a long history of oppression and violence towards them. But of course, when a Palestinian raises his hand or fires a gun, or a Black American dares to show up in a white neighborhood and somebody suspects that he might be thinking about something that might resemble violence, boom, that's it. They come down on them, and suddenly these communities are violent and these communities are dangerous, and it justifies a whole new round of violence against them. So there's a lot of similarity there. Like you said, Palestinians are in the news when there's an act of violence, but the vast majority of Palestinian resistance over the past 100 years against the Zionist taking of their land has been unarmed. Palestinians have never had a military force. They've never had an army. They've never had a helicopter or tank or anything. Palestinians have never had a military force. The vast majority of their resistance, which has been considerable, has been unarmed. They've done it in many, many other different ways. And today, probably the most prominent and well-known is the call for boycott, divestment, and sanctions, which is, of course, an excellent method. So, there's a lot. So there are many similarities in that regard. Now, in terms of what Israelis think and how they see this ends, I think there's similarities here as well. You always blame the victim. If there's anything going wrong with the African American community in America, it's of course their fault, because they don't work hard, because they're lazy, because they're this, because they don't go to school, because they have all these issues. The same thing is being said by Israeli officials all the time, and the media, about the Palestinians. They're lazy, they're violent, they're disorganized, and so on and so forth. It's all their fault, which of course it isn't. In either case, in both cases, it's never the victim's fault. But in terms of the way Israel sees it is, well, we have no choice. We always have to go into fight. We always have to, this is the reality, and this is how it's going to be forever. Palestinians can leave, fight, or surrender. Those are the three options. A life where there's real peaceful coexistence is not an option that Palestinians are given by Israel, which means that Israel is willing to always have this life of killing people, always being a very militaristic society, relying on the military heavily. And as long as they have the upper hand, they're fine. They don't care.
That is the voice of Miko Peled. We've got to take a break. Miko Peled is a human rights activist and the author of The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, and also the author of Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. By the way, you can follow Miko on Twitter at Miko Peled, Mikopeled. You can also buy his books. That's Miko Peled. You can also buy his books on Amazon and learn more about him and his work by going to mikopeled.com. Again, we're taking a break. We'll be back in just a second with Miko. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines.
Do you have access to a radio? Yeah, it's me, Max Kaiser. I'm here with Stacey Herbert. We have a new show on Sputnik called Double Down. It's business, finance, economics, ka-ching, bling, and everything in between. That's Double Down on Sputnik. Tune in.
Stuck in traffic? No problem. Stay informed. Stay tuned to Radio Sputnik on 105.5 FM or 1390 AM in the Washington, D.C. area. Need more? Follow us on Facebook or check us out on SputnikNews.com.
Fault Lines.
All right, we're coming back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're joined by Miko Peled, human rights activist and author of The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, also the author of Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. Miko, we're talking about Israel, Palestine. I want to turn for a second to Israel and Pompeo. Pompeo given a speech at the RNC yesterday. People now in the United States pushing back, saying maybe they'll invoke the Hatch Act. Maybe Pompeo is violating some rules there, acting out of his position as the Secretary of State. I'm curious about your position on that topic. We don't need to get into that. I'm also curious about, you're talking about the UAE-Israel deal. opening up negotiations and Israel stating at least that it's going to hold off on annexing these Palestinian territories. You can get into that too specifically. But what's your take on Pompeo getting some pushback in the States? Do you think that indicates anything in the States in terms of our view of Israel, or do you think this is purely political here? And also, what do you think Pompeo's up to while he's over there? What have you been following in terms of his activities?
Well, his job over there is to butter up these regimes like the UAE, like Sudan, and probably Bahrain coming up as well, to agree to sign some kind of a peace agreement to open diplomatic relations with Israel, in return for which their regimes will receive money and arms and then access and the usual things that the empire provides when you when you do the things that the empire demands. In terms of what is happening here and him speaking at the Republican convention, the Trump administration never cared about these things, and they get away with violating American laws and rules and customs. Trump has done it from the very get-go. So why shouldn't Pompeo do it? But this is a nod for and Trump said this very clearly. This is a nod. This whole Middle East policy is a nod to the evangelical community, the white, born again, right-wing evangelical community. This is all for them. When Trump comes up and says he made some kind of a deal for Israel with another Arab country, it's good, by the way, for Netanyahu and his election campaign, which probably will be coming up soon, and it's good for Trump and his election campaign, which we know is around the corner. So that's what this is all about. It's all about buttering up these terrible regimes so that they would agree to make peace with Israel, throw the Palestinians under the bus again, and make Trump and Netanyahu look good.
Miko, how does Israel view Trump's behavior? Like, when I was over there, I had the weirdest experience in talking to some people who would talk about Trump, and they were like, yeah, pro-Trump, Trump is awesome, Trump is great. And then we get into policy, and it was like, yeah, we don't know why Trump is doing this or Trump is doing that. It was almost as if the accolades, the love of Trump, had everything to do explicitly and only with his tenor towards Israel, nothing else regarding policy. Is that like there has to be other issues that are in Israel from the political standpoint than the Palestinian one? Is that like just the overlaying issue for pretty much everything? Like everything else is basically subordinate to that. And so I'm asking this question in two ways. When you guys, or it's Israelis, when they're looking at Trump's behavior around the world, for that matter, even in internal domestic politics of the United States, how do they perceive it? And on the second point, is everything else subordinate from Trump's perspective to Israel? And internal politics to Israel, what are the other issues on the queue? And even those issues, are those issues directly related to the Palestinian issue?
Well, everything is subordinate to the Palestinian issue. There's no question about that. So as long, Israelis love Trump. They love him more than they've loved any other American president. And very many American presidents have been very good to Israel, but they love him more than anyone. And when he visited a few years ago, I was there in Jerusalem. And when he came to visit, the thing they loved the most about him is that he did not bring a plan. He did not have a peace plan. He did not have anything any demands of them. They were given a blank check more than any other time in history to do anything they wanted, and so they love him beyond belief. And this is really it is the overriding issue. As long as they keep he's agreeing to sell weapons to Israel at enormous amounts, the foreign aid flows freely. Anything that has to do with Israeli policy in the Middle East and the Israeli policy towards Iran, he embraces and supports. They love him. That's really all that matters. As long as he supports Israel, nothing else matters. And you have to, and you were there, so I'm sure you've seen this. Israeli society is a heavily militarized, racist society. I mean, I was born, I was raised in that society. It is a heavily racist, heavily militarized society. The discourse in Israel, the racist discourse in Israel, is not even something people are embarrassed about. It's not even something they're ashamed about. And so this is the backdrop. You mentioned Jerusalem earlier. West Jerusalem was a Palestinian city. West Jerusalem until 1948 was Palestinian, and in 1948 it was it was subjected to a 100% ethnic cleansing campaign. Not a single Palestinian lives or exists or was allowed to remain in West Jerusalem. Tel Aviv was Jaffa, and a bunch of other small Palestinian towns and villages all wiped off. You know, Tel Aviv is really like walking on a graveyard of towns and cities and people that until 1948 lived there. But now, like you said, you walk around there, and these are the completely modern, kind of westernized cities. So this is the reality in which Israelis live, and work and go to school every single day. And everything is measured by support for Israel and support for its violence and racism. And Trump is the perfect guy. He's the perfect candidate.
Miko, how has this changed over the years? In the end of the last segment, I asked you about your family, your history, your background. You were talking about your dad, Matidyahu. How's that pronounced? I just want to make sure I'm not getting that wrong. Is it Matidyahu? Madi Peled?
Yeah, Madi Peled was how he was called, yeah.
Thank you. Yeah, I'm sorry. Again, it's personal. I don't mean to, I don't know.
It's fine. It's fine. I get asked that all the time. I'm happy to talk about it.
What I'm curious about is, how has it changed over the years? He was prominent in advocating for a two-state solution, going up against the Israeli establishment at the time. How is in Israel the national view, the political view of the Palestinian question changed over the decades since he first took a stand on that issue?
It hasn't changed at all. The only difference is that there used to be this desire to pretend to want peace. And over the last, 3-4 decades, they realized they don't even need to pretend. So they're not even pretending anymore. But in terms of, the Palestinians, the state of Israel was established after a massive campaign of ethnic cleansing and massacres perpetrated against the Palestinians. So, the state of Israel has always been, it was founded on racism. It was founded on this initial crime of the ethnic cleansing of Palestine. So that hasn't changed at all, but the expressions have become more clear and more honest. Whereas in the past, they would be a little more careful in how they express themselves, especially to the outside world. Today, they don't care. They express themselves in the most racist terms, and they don't care. But in terms of policy, nothing's really changed. And in terms of my development, I was a proud Zionist. I believed that we need to compromise a little bit, but I believed in the right of Israel to exist and the right of Jews to live in Israel and so forth. And what I realized was that this entire ideology, upon which the state of Israel is founded, which is called Zionism, is based on a false premise, is based on lies, historic lies, complete distortion of history. And I, in good conscience, could not remain a supporter of Zionism, cannot agree to any sign of that will legitimize the state of Israel, because it is a racist apartheid state. Now, that doesn't mean that all Israelis have to be killed or thrown out, right? That's usually what the other side says. But we need to look at a decolonizing of Palestine. We need to look at creating a political environment with one person, one vote, with complete equality, and getting rid of the privilege that I have when I'm there, or not even getting rid of it, extending the same privilege to Palestinians. There's plenty. It's a rich country. It's rich with it's got a lot of possibilities. It's a beautiful place. But as long as one side wishes to control the other, as long as Israelis want to maintain privilege over the Palestinians, it's not going to work. The only way to move forward, and it is a very real possibility, is to have a real democratic state, one person, one vote, which respects the differences and the different groups that live there, and guarantee their rights and guarantee their safety, which does not happen right now. Palestinian safety is not guaranteed. Palestinian lives are cheap. And then there's a chance to move forward. All we need to do is extend the privilege to everybody else.
Why is it in there? I'm guessing that it's in the interest of the Israeli establishment to not extend those interests. Can you just talk about, or to not extend those privileges? Can you just talk about why? Can you talk about what structurally, why does it benefit the Israeli establishment to continue this weird situation, this complicated, drawn-out, violent situation?
Well, because Israel is founded on a racist ideology that says that people like myself, the Jews around the world, are superior in their rights to Palestinians in Palestine. The Palestinians have no rights, that the land belongs to the Jews. That is the underlying ideology that created the state of Israel. So if you believe in that ideology, it's like being in the South or being a racist. You believe that you are superior to somebody else because of their color, because of their religion, because of their nationality. Israelis believe that they are superior. They have rights to the land that Palestinians, who are the indigenous people, and by the way, make up the majority of the population today, do not have. And that is why they continue. Now, I don't think it's good for Israel. I think in the end, this is in a way, this is the monster that will end up consuming itself, because the racists are also incredibly stupid, and they don't see that they are actually destroying themselves from within with the racism and violence. And so that's this absurd reality in which Israeli society and the state of Israel live.
Let me ask you one last question, Miko. We're going to end it after this one. But
got about a minute and a half left.
Yeah, we have about a minute left. So just real quick, from the standpoint where you're looking at this, how does this end? How do you, if you could whisper in somebody's ear, if you had the ability, let's say God King Miko Peled, how do you resolve this particular situation for both parties equitably, if possible?
Well, the Zionist state, the state of Israel, has to be dismantled peacefully and give way to a democracy with equal rights. Palestinian refugees who have a right to return are given the opportunity, are given the means to return to their homes, return to their land, paid reparations, which is something I believe needs to happen here in America too. But they're paid reparations. They're paid for 75 years of dispossession. And Palestine is decolonized, and a real free democratic state is established instead of the state of Israel. That is how, and I believe that is how this is going to end.
That was the voice of Miko Peled. A great pre-recorded interview we did yesterday with Miko. Miko Peled, human rights activist and author of The General's Son, Journey of an Israeli in Palestine, and also the author of Injustice, the story of the Holy Land Foundation 5. By the way, you can follow Miko on Twitter at Miko Peled. That's spelled MikoPeled. You can also buy his books on Amazon, and you can learn more about him and his work by going to MikoPeled.com. We'll be back in a minute. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're going into our last hour in a minute. Talking with Mark Frost at 9:30. Thanks for listening. We'll be back in a minute. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Listening to Radio Sputnik. Telling the untold.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're live, listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan, live from the divided states of America. In the independent corner and on the West Coast, I am independent investigative political analyst and talk show host Shane Stranahan.
And in the left corner, I am the indefatigable, the ever vigilant, the last man on the wall with my co-host Shane Stranahan, your political analyst Jamal Thomas.
And together we are Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Man, I just wanted to get out of that. That was fumbling. Just being straightforward here. All right, going into it, we're talking
Sometimes
about
it
headlines.
happens. It's like you just can't get it out. You can't get it out. Yeah.
Totally. Yeah, no, it's weird. Anyway, 7, 8, and 9 a.m. Eastern, we do the headlines every morning. That's 4, 5, and 6 a.m. Pacific. That's my time. And let's get straight into them. Night 3 of the Republican National Convention took place last night. Vice President Pence gave a 37-minute speech. During that longer speech, he warned Americans they won't be safe in Joe Biden's America. That was a big theme. Specifically told Americans that the Trump administration, quote, will have law and order on the streets of this country for every American, end quote. That is going to be the issue going into this election. I'm going on a tiny tangent during headlines, but I mean, obviously, I'll come back to that in just a minute here. That's going to be one of these huge things. It would have been a big thing with what was going on a couple of months ago, what's been going on in Portland, but Kenosha seems to have really brought that back to the forefront. We'll see what happens over the next 2.5 months, but two some odd months. Anyway, in our next headline, Hurricane Laura was a Cat 4 on landfall with surges as tall as 20 feet as it hit a band along Louisiana and Texas's coast. It has been called the region's strongest storm in over a century. It effectively hit the state line between Texas and Louisiana and ran straight up that line. The Vermilion Parish Sheriff's Office, just to give you a sense of how bad it was, the Vermilion Parish Sheriff's Office asked people in the region, I'm going to quote here, please evacuate. And if you choose to stay and we can't get to you, write your name, address, social security number, and next of kin, and put it in a Ziploc bag in your pocket, praying that it does not come to this, end quote. People, again, 600,000 people asked to evacuate. Double-decker storm system here, where you had Hurricane Marco coming in over the weekend on Monday, then you have Hurricane Laura hitting last night. And Hurricane Marco was underwhelming, not that bad. Hurricane Laura seems set to be horrible. Again, worst in a century. Guy McPherson called it worst in a decade just because he sees things as getting worse. Anyway, messy. Hope everybody down there stays as safe as they can. In our next headline, a 17-year-old who shot and killed 2 men and injured 1 other has been arrested after reportedly attempting to flee Wisconsin. The 17-year-old man's name is Kyle Rittenhouse. Again, Kenosha, a flashpoint both in American culture and in the election. We're going to see where this goes, talking about it more in this hour. In our next headline, China has fired missiles in the South China Sea in response to the United States flying a U-2 spy plane into that region. Apparently, the U.S. flew that spy plane in while China was apparently in the middle of military exercises. Again, one can't help but think that this might be a little bit intentional, that the U.S. might have been flying a spy plane, to pick something up on those military exercises. And again, this came out yesterday. China then fired 2 missiles in response to that as a sort of warning, cautionary thing. I don't like this stuff, man. Yeah, war seems to be on the footing in the States. Next headline: Jeff Bezos has become the world's first $200 billion man. Second in place is Bill Gates with $123 billion, but Jeff would have passed this threshold earlier if it weren't for a recent divorce that left his ex-wife Mackenzie Bezos with about $60 billion. Most of Jeff's money comes from Bezos' ownership of Amazon, which is worth, as a company, about $1.72 trillion, behind only Apple, valued at over $2 trillion. Last headline this morning, this came out very early in the morning, about 2 a.m. my time. The White House has announced the creation of 12 AI and quantum research institutes. And there's some details on those institutes. I was reading about it. We'll have more on this soon. This is just something I'm interested in, so I'll probably want to get back into it. But yeah, information on quantum computing, quantum sciences, engineering, also information, institutes on AI, student AI learning, trustworthy AI and weather, climate, and oceanography, so doing climatic stuff. Yeah, people who are excited about this stuff are going to be excited about this stuff. People who are worried about this stuff are going to be worried about it as these things go. So it is. Those are the fault lines. You're listening to Top News. You're also listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. Oh, man, what is it? Those are the headlines. See, I got that wrong too, Jamarl. Gosh, that's embarrassing. All right, we're back into it. We're taking calls. 202-521-1320 is the number. 202-521-1320 is the number. We're taking calls. I want to see where these institutes go. I don't want to get too deep into the AI stuff just because, we've already covered that and it's kind of esoteric. But with this announcement, the other side of that, of course, is the Quantum Research Center. That's probably going to be a bit of a boondoggle. It's probably going to be a lot of money spent, but we'll see what comes out of that. We'll see if some cool stuff comes out of that. Quantum computing has become a big thing. We might have talked about this a while back, but I had a guess. I thought I could get us on quantum computing and like anionic braiding and stuff, which is just just interesting to think about. I don't even know exactly what that is.
You couldn't get him?
You just dropped out.
Oh,
couldn't get him.
Oh, that sucks. I would have loved that guess.
For a second.
I would have loved,
Yeah,
what I would love
it's pulled back.
is for the United States, instead of spending $1 trillion on military, to do so in science. Whether that's AI, whether that's quantum computing is going to be, oh my God, you're talking about qubits. Like under normal circumstances, we're talking about 0 and 1. We don't get into the weirdness of the superposition of state where something is a pregnant and not pregnant at the exact same time. The whole, what is it called? The Schrodinger's cat stuff, where you have this particle that is basically in a superposition of state, and then at some point it chooses one or the other, but also neither. Now, this is like 0, 1, and both 0, 1 at the same time. People are like, what? That doesn't make any sense. Yeah, when you get into the quantum realm, it does. When Shane and I are talking about, if you're not paying attention to your house, is your house really there? You would say yes, I would say no. Shane probably would say no. Because what Shane knows is that in the quantum realm, even from the standpoint of what we consider to be reality, what's most likely true is that when nothing is paying attention to it, it's not there. It's like in a quantum foam. The moment that in a person, something, a cat, a dog, an insect, some level of reality puts consciousness on it, pops into existence. You don't even notice it. It happens that fast. That's what the research shows, the double slit experiments and everything else, that the scientists, even though they try to not be part of the experiment, can't help but be part of the experiment because there are consciousnesses applied to it. They're observing it. The very act of observation changes the results of the experiment. Now, that's mind-blowing. And scientists look at that as, well, that's weird. And they don't necessarily take that maybe as what they consider to be physical matter reality is physical to us, but may not necessarily be as physical as we think it is. So, Shane, get that guy. I don't care what you have to do. Show some leg. get somebody for the quantum thing. That stuff would be fascinating.
We'll see if he comes around. Yeah, I think he was skeptical about being too much in the public eye. I think, he just had a job and he was worried about coming on any radio show. It wasn't just that we're, Russian government funded. He was actually interested in that part because he watches RT and stuff. But he was just cautious. It would be great though, man. I mean, the other thing, you're talking about quantum physics. One of the, so you were describing some of the sort of like better known weird things. So the Schrodinger's cat experiment,
oddities of it.
Superposition. Yeah, exactly. All of this stuff. I've been. You have to have a pretty substantial math background in a variety of fields that most people never get to, and that takes time. And so you have kind of slowly over the years gotten deeper and deeper. But I'm still very, very, very new to all this stuff. Obviously, the weird thing for me getting into it is like the actual weird and kind of incomprehensible stuff in terms of the math, where. Why do twistors exist? Like, why is the angular momentum of fermionic matter, why does it have to go through like 2 rotations in order to come back to normal? Why do you have to, this doesn't make any sense to me. I couldn't even explain it on the air. But why is matter fundamentally divided into fermions and bosons? Why is some matter massive and other matter not? What does it mean for matter to not be massive? How is,
You mean like neutrinos?
Basically comes to terms with matter and energy. So on the most basic levels, it's hard to grasp. And then you get into the math and some of the interesting scientific objects like gauge bundles and things. And you have to wonder what actually is going on. And I still think we don't quite know.
No, we don't.
That doesn't mean we should.
No, we don't know. I'm saying this as somebody who took quantum mechanics in school. We don't know. I was a physics major at one point, and I realized I like the science. I don't like the math. Like, I didn't necessarily like sitting there trying to work through the math of it. I like the science of it all. And so it's like, they don't know. When I was sitting in class, and I forget exactly what they were talking about, and I said, well, why? Why does that happen that way? And she explained it. I said, no. But why? And eventually she says, oh, okay, I see how you're asking that. We don't quite know that. It's just, basically it's observation, and it's writing down observation. But just because you can observe and you can say, this is what's likely to happen, this is what we expect to happen, that's not the same thing as understanding the underlying elements of why. And that's where
maybe asking why is like asking a question of the universe that the universe does not know how to answer. You know what I mean? Maybe you're asking it a question that is a human question, and the universe doesn't, as an entity, through the scientific terms that we've established to communicate with it and verify what it's telling us through our senses or whatever, however you want to put that, it can't answer that question for us. We've got to answer that question ourselves because we're the ones who asked it in the first place.
Well, the universe doesn't care. The universe just is. From the standpoint of the scientist, you're right. It's a human thing, right? It's a human element that says why. That's the most, God, man, I don't think people grasp how fascinating that question is. Why are you here? Why are you aware? And is anybody else even in the room with you, for that matter? You don't even, like, those, I don't know, because I can't read Shane thoughts. The Shanes exist. I don't know if even my wife exists. For all I know, she's some kind of part of a program that we're engaged in. By the same token, you take it as an act of faith, right? The why is the question that I think is probably the most profound, and that goes almost beyond science. Like, because the science, even if you get into this notion of, okay, why do we exist? Meaning from the standpoint of why is there a bias between particles versus antiparticles? Why? If that bias didn't exist, matter wouldn't exist, nobody would be here. Even Shane, when you're talking about neutrinos, those things are massless. Like, those are just kind of properties of our environment, and then scientists try to figure out, well, why is that as opposed to something else? Why is there this kind of weird quantum mechanics? Quantum mechanics is difficult only because it's counterintuitive. Like, if you were talking about Newtonian mechanics, well, you could throw a ball. You know when you throw a ball. When you're driving a car, you could feel the pressure on your chest. You could feel all that stuff. But what does it look like for something to go from one energy level to another energy level without necessarily going through the intervening space between those two things? How do you process that? You know what I mean? That gets so bizarre, and it gets so fascinating. Even questions of the soul, if such exists, and how this effect where a particle can basically be attached to another particle and then take on the spin that's opposite instantaneously, regardless of the space that's intervening. This was Einstein playing, God playing dice with the universe stuff. Because from our vantage point, you drive from point A to point B, and that there is a contact between point A and point B. There has to be something intervening between those things. But in quantum mechanics, it doesn't seem to be. The spin changes the moment that those things react. Meaning, I'm saying this poorly, but if I'm dealing with one particle that's been entangled to another particle, if I change the spin on that other particle will be billions of miles away and instantaneously flips over, allowing you to have almost instantaneous communication despite not necessarily having any intervening thing between those things. It's fascinating. And God, we spent an entire segment talking about this, and I wanted to go into something that you talked about, meaning the perspective of people dealing with protests, because the perspective of people has changed. And it's like from June, there's research out, and I can show you. But this is coming from, the Washington Post did research on people's perspectives, but they also did this on, let me see, Charles Franklin Marquette Law School poll, and this was 8/26/2020. Now this didn't take into account the killing of Jacob Blake. But what you see is that there's a skew between how whites see this versus how blacks see this. And the skew wasn't there prior. Meaning, in Washington Post poll, that skew wasn't there. As time went on, that skew started to develop that much more. It's fascinating. I'm going to show you guys the poll, but we're going to have to take a break. We'll take the caller. Brendan in Virginia, you'll be next as soon as we come back. You guys are listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment.
Fault Lines. 24 hours a day, 7 days a week. We give you the most essential information out there. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold.
Peer into the future with Political Misfits on Thursdays, when we analyze the latest trends in news, politics, and culture. Catch us on 105.5 in Washington, D.C., or 102.9 or 104.7 in Kansas City. Achtung, baby.
Fault Lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We're taking calls, 202-521-1320. Again, our number, 202-521-1320. We've got Brendan calling in from Virginia. Brendan, you're on the line. What's going on?
Hey, guys. I just wanted to make a quick comment on the science and climate change. I think a kind of underappreciated aspect is that when we're talking about the new Cold War, a lot of times, I don't know if you heard, there was a cancer researcher that was deported back to China because they were supposedly working for their government or whatever. And it kind of reminds me of, like, in the 50s, there was another Chinese physicist who was deported back to China, and he became one of their pioneers that helped them with their nuclear weapons program. And so I feel like there's almost this autoimmune aspect where we start to silo and think of everything as a competition. And then, when you look at things like the ISS, and it was such an amazing promise, that all these countries working together. And now we're talking about the Space Force, and all this kind of, and it's just really sad, I think. So I just wanted to get your take on, how we could be cooperating globally and climate change, but we're doing all these petty squabbles instead.
Thank you, Brendan.
It is interesting. Yeah, no,
it is
thanks for
infinitely
that call.
sad.
Great points.
Yeah, infinitely sad. I mean, he's right. I mean, think about it for the moment. Think of all the resources across your world, and think of how much of that is spent trying to kill somebody else. Now, in comparison, think about a world that wasn't doing that. And instead of those resources being trying to kill everybody else, those resources was used to the betterment of other people, to the science, to the technology, and trying to make people's lives better. You could do one or the other. You can't do both. And this is kind of what we decided. There's one more thing, Shane. The climate stuff. There is something that what's his name argued, that McPherson argued, that we should be able to see in real terms. So smog, this kind of global dimming, the notion that despite the greenhouse effect and the greenhouse gas, that there's also this secondary effect that when you're putting smog and all this stuff into the air, it creates a dimming of the sun. So even though the sun is shining, you've somewhat dimmed the amount of let's say, radiation or heat, coming towards this planet. So the planet doesn't get as hot as it typically would get. The interesting part, though, we should be able to see the science of that. Because if you look at China, if you look at the United States, with COVID-19, you've had a situation where the smog went away. I mean, California was talking about, hey, we can see the sky. They were saying stuff like that. And so if that's true, then you should also get an increase in temperatures, right? Since the smog went away.
You do.
I forgot to ask McPherson that when he was here.
We've seen that. He brought this up the last time he was on.
Oh, did he?
Yeah, no,
the temperature increase?
He had somebody he was talking about, the weird contradictory sort of Chinese finger trap position that we're in, with our climate, with COVID right now. That was the last time he was on. And then somebody on Twitter, after he was on today, was kind of pushing back on the idea that he was presenting with the mirrors reflecting sunlight back into space. And they were bringing up...
Yeah, but I'm saying that we should see that in real terms. Like right now, we should see it in real terms.
Wait, what?
Well, we should see it in real terms. Like the smog in many of the places for COVID-19 has gone away. And so if that's true, we should also see an increase in temperatures that...
You have. I think...
Oh, we have.
The article that he posted showed an increase of like 1 to 2 Celsius. So, that's a handful of Fahrenheit, not a handful, a couple degrees Fahrenheit. That's enough that, you're getting recorded increases in temperature. And then, of course, once industry picks back up and you get the resumption of that smog, then those temps are going to drop back down. But like Guy McPherson was saying, if you're just looking at that simple system, then you see this contradiction, which is while you have industry growing, you're releasing these long-term greenhouse gases, you're releasing those. Those are going to be causing long-term problems, of course, but you're also creating this layer of smog that reduces temperatures just literally by providing this veil, like you're saying, the smoke screen. Anyway, he did bring that up, and we have seen those increases. I was just lucky enough to see the guy responding on Twitter to Guy's appearance earlier today. One quick, Brendan, calling in. You're talking about the space race. That is a great call. I want to support that. Great call. My very quick comment before we go to other callers isn't it remarkable that we got the ISS, we've got a bunch of stuff done, basically, over the past, say, 60, 70 years, but, leaning towards the first part of that period, since the space race really kicked off, over the last 50 years, almost 60 years at this point. We've gotten a lot of stuff done, and most of that stuff happened during this Cold War. Isn't it weird and remarkable that it's now, like after the Cold War is supposedly over, it's in the last 20 years that things have decayed, things have gotten so broken down that we're not seeing that stuff happen. I don't know if I'm making sense here, but it's just weird to me that you saw all of this collaboration and competition, but apparently productive competition and collaboration between countries at a time when things were explicitly very tense. And yet now, when things are at least explicitly a little bit less tense, we're seeing so much less cooperation. I feel like there are other factors at play here, but it's still really good, I think, to take that historical perspective, looking at the space industry. Anyway, we've got other callers. Rod calling in from Philly. You're on, Rod. What's going on?
What's going on, fellas? When I was in college, I had to take a environmental conservation class, and it was somewhat interesting. And one of the things that we had to watch in the class, it was The Inconvenient Truth. And if people ever seen that, there's been part 1 and part 2 with, I believe the main narrator was Al Gore. And a lot of those predictions, I believe about 80% of those predictions have been all wrong. Where we're supposed to be saying the shorelines are supposed to be disappearing. things like that. So when we talk about science, the same way we talk in medicine, when they're wrong, we have to go back and revise it. A lot of people just want to keep going forward and pushing forward like what was said wasn't wrong. First, it was global warming. Now we've changed the phrase to climate change. But as in the 70s, you can look at Time magazine covers where they said we're going into the ice age, global cooling. Then in the 80s, they started moving into global warming. You can even see the Obama administration. For the first about 6 years, he was saying global warming, and then he changed for the last 2 years, and he says climate change. Well, which one is it? Is it warming? Are we cooling? There's no consensus. So we just have. Go ahead.
I just want to, real quick, Rod, I think that's fair. I mean, I think it's fair to like be skeptical of this stuff because there have been plenty of cases where people have been apocalyptic when they shouldn't have been, when they were wrong, and I think that's muddied the waters. But Jamarl, I didn't mean to cut you off there.
No, you can cut me off. UFOs or UAPs, they're the same thing. People change the name of something for political effect to try to, get people more interested or not. Look, I don't have any issue with being skeptical of scientists, especially in their predictions. You should be. But this is slightly different. I mean, come on. The temperatures are increasing. And whether or not they can say, dealing with a physical system that they are making predictions and estimates on, and those estimates and so forth change, the temperatures are raising. They're increasing. And they can look at the models and see that the models were insufficient. I mean, look, I'm not talking about Time magazine screaming about an ice age. I'm talking about something where you can go outside and feel. You can look at the measurements that are taking place and see it. This is not, at this point, magic. Look at the hurricanes, for God's sake. The predictions aren't wrong. The predictions may be off in the sense of time scale, but that's just because they're human beings trying to figure out a physical system where they're making metrics off of for something that doesn't care about their metrics.
But that can still mean they're wrong. No. I mean, if they're off in time scale, if they're depending on how off they are, if it says that it's going to happen in a couple of minutes and it happens in 10 years, I would say that's wrong.
No, that's fair. That's fair. But if you're saying, okay, this is going to happen in 100 years, I mean, even Trump's scientists, Trump's own scientists, look at the report. They're talking about like 6 to 7 degrees or 9 degrees, I think it's in 100 years, and saying we can't do anything about it. That's the guy who says it's not real. So this isn't just, one or two scientists. This is a preponderance of the evidence that's saying the world is heating up. Now, you could say, well, it's not heating up as fast as they said. Okay, fair enough. I will make the point to you, though, that the recent metrics on this, using satellite imagery and data and everything else, has shown that the scientists have been wrong in the opposite way, meaning it's been worse. And listen to the reports. They start getting like hair on fire. These guys are usually, well, this is going to take place and blah, blah, blah. The reports that are coming out from the United Nations have become hair on fire. So, look, I agree with you. If I'm right, and the scientists are right, then you get a better world and you deal with an issue. If I am wrong, you still get a cleaner world. So, you can go which way you want on this, and you can take however you feel on this, but you do have to, at the very least, acknowledge that your world is getting hotter. And I think that's something that, regardless of the timescale, that is something that seems to be infinitely true with all of the consequences that come from that, meaning the increased flooding, hurricanes, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera. So I feel you, Rod. Fair enough.
I feel him on that too. I can't tell if that last argument there, where, if we act, we're doing ourselves, in either event, if we act, we're doing ourselves a favor. I kind of don't buy that. That feels a little bit like Pascal's wager to me, which I would take as a fallacy. But on the other hand, maybe you're just hedging your bets. I don't know. There are a couple ways to look at that. We've got other callers, though.
Wait. There's a beautiful part to that. Have you ever heard, I forget the name of the scientist, but he was wearing a cross. And somebody said, wait, you're a scientist. You believe in God? No, I don't believe in it. But I'm told it works, even if I don't. Even if I don't believe in it. I love that, right? Fair enough.
It's true. It's true, but there's so many gods, and that's the thing, is there opportunity cost. There's so many different ways you could use your time.
You're thinking too much about that, Shane. I'm being very specific from the Pascal's wager stuff. I'm laughing at it. I think you're right, but go ahead. Let's keep going.
No, I know. Okay, and even there too. Anyway, we should. Karen from Maryland. Karen, you're calling in. You're on. What's going on?
Oh, hi there. Okay. First comment is this is about credit scores and credit reports. I just wanted to share a perspective on that quickly. Instead of taking the position that if you're denied something because of a poor credit score, instead of blaming yourself and thinking that you have a weakness. It should be their fault that they require you to have such a high credit score, because the last time I was denied something because I had to have a higher credit score, I blamed them instead of me, and they didn't quite know how to respond to that. I said, this is not my fault, honey, it's yours. Anyway, issue number 2 is, I just wanted to point out that when you look at the Crime Solvers websites, that the Crime Solvers websites do not list the cases in which the rewards have been paid out, and they don't list.
Karen, wait, why are you calling us about both of these things? What are these? I don't understand what the point of this is.
Oh, okay. Well, there was nothing wrong with it. Okay. Well,
I don't know.
Right.
We've never talked about Crime Solvers. I think I know what that is. I think you called Garland when he was on before, but I think the relevance then was that he was a cop, but I know literally nothing about that. I would recommend calling his show. He's on Critical Hour if you want to call him and ask him about that program. And then the credit. Why did you bring that up? I just don't get it. I mean, thank you for the call, but I don't understand. Anyway, I don't mean to cut you off. Did you have any other comments? Anything specifically stuff that relates to what we were talking about?
So I'll be courteous to them. Thank you.
Okay, thank you. No, it wasn't even that. It's just, I don't know. We could talk about so many things, and maybe some people would prefer to talk about that over what we talk about normally. But I just don't know what the relevance was. Anyway, we're taking calls 202-521-1320. We had one more on right after this, but apparently they dropped. It was going to be, I won't even say their name and feel vaguely wrong.
I think it's brave.
Take calls 202.
Yeah. He'll call back.
It was, and we'll see.
There's one other thing that we didn't talk about. There was a altercation between the United States and Russia in Syria. And apparently, American troops have been injured, involving in some kind of event that took place between these two. Look, we shouldn't be in Syria in the first place. And right now, you have Russians, Iranians, Syrians, all of these guys in one small, tiny area. We're there to steal the oil and to steal the crops and to try to push the country into basically famine and depravity. Russia's there to maintain the country. That's basically the bare bones of it. You would have a lot of people that yelled at Trump saying, keep those troops there. I was one of those people that said Trump is right, get those troops out, including the American soldiers working with terrorists to steal the oil and destroy the crops. But that's not what happened. And so Russia, who's been invited, the United States, who has not been invited, gets into something where I guess a truck rams it or these guys hit one another and some American troops are killed. So now, of course, injured. It's like, I think it was like a concussion or something. But you have this situation now where all of these people are screaming at the Russians as if they're not the invited party. How weird is this country in the way we talk about these things? CNN will cover this story and you would not hear one moment that we're stealing oil, destroying crops, both of which are war crimes, or for that matter, that we are not invited and Russians are. Mark my words. You would hear it on CNN. All right, so I'll take us out. We only have about a minute.
That's good.
You guys are listening. I'm sorry, guys. We're like in different parts of the country, so there's a slight lag. You guys are listening to the Fault Lines. This is Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back in a moment with Mark Frost, which is always an interesting conversation. We'll be back shortly.
Fault lines. Tough questions are the most powerful weapon we have. As long as you have questions, we'll keep asking. Radio Sputnik, telling the untold. Fault lines.
And we're back. You're listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan and Frost. We're very glad, delighted even, to have Mark Frost with us talking about economics, the nature of profit, the notion of profit, and riots and the RNC, what's been going down in Kenosha, and the response to it, subtly and explicitly coming from the Republican National Convention. Mark, thank you for joining us this morning. How are you doing?
Good morning. I'm doing pretty good. Got my cat next to me, got a cup of coffee. Life is good.
Good to hear. While you're there and while your cat is there, would you care to introduce us? What is, this is a little bit awkward. You know, I feel intimate suddenly with that cat. My name is Shane. I don't know. What is your name?
Calls him Gauss. He's named after Frederick Gauss, who is the inventor of the bell curve and modern statistics, t-testing and all that.
The Gaussian distribution and the notion of randomness and key figure in statistics. Thank you.
Yes,
I appreciate the introduction. Wow.
Yes, and he just turned 20 this month. So, yeah.
Oh wow.
That's awesome. Good for him and good for you. All right. Thank you for joining us. With that out of the way, glad to get into the actual topic here. But I did want to introduce a cat. Always happy to do that. We're talking about Kenosha. We're also talking about Trump. I hear that you recently switched over. We've for a long time when we've introduced you on the show, we've billed you as libertarian-ish. Now we're billing you as a recovering libertarian.
Interesting.
Yeah. I hear, Mark, you're voting for Trump. Why is that? What changed your mind?
Because I'm mad at them.
Mad at who?
We touched on it last time I was on.
Wait. Mad at who? You said them.
I'm mad at the libertarians.
Oh, I see. Okay. I'm sorry. Continue. I didn't know who them was. My bad. When I said them, I thought initially you meant Democrats, which is why you're voting Trump. But I'm sorry. Please continue.
Sure. Well, it's a very reluctant vote. It isn't like I got my pom-poms on and my mini dress and I'm just, doing a jig because I get to go vote for Trump. It's one of those things where you're like, okay, I get to vote for Stalin, I get to vote for Hitler, or I get to vote for Pol Pot. Which one is most likely the one that is going to give me the existence that I seek? Or better said, which one is most likely not to interfere with the existence I'm trying to build for myself? So that's sort of the mental rationality that's going through my head. I'm not enthused by any of the people running. The only person I did get excited for as far as candidates, which I'm still trying to understand, by the way, I'll fully admit to all my critics that I have a little bit of inconsistency on that, but I did really like Tulsi Gabbard. I donated to her campaign. All that sort of stuff. So, but she didn't go anywhere because the system didn't like her. So.
Wait. So what's the?
Mark, excellent.
Okay, I see. Yeah, go ahead, Shane. I'm sorry.
Thank you. Yeah, Mark, as you can hear, we're struggling with a weird delay. We're going to try to get this fixed soon. Who would you liken Trump to? You brought out Hitler. You brought out Pol Pot. You brought out a bunch of different wicked people. Which person would you liken Trump to? How do you see? I mean, it's silly to even put it in these terms. And again, it's hyperbolic to have to speak about these things this way. But looking at the election, what historical analogs would you try to draw to give some parallels? What's your sense of where we are in time, looking at history as a frame of reference?
Well, I was being, very facetious. It's in the morning. I'm still kind of frisky. I don't think any of them are Hitler or Stalin or Pol Pot. What I do believe is that none of them believe in the things that I believe in. I don't think Tulsi did either, but at least Tulsi had what I consider heart. She had heart and she had character in a way that I don't often judge politicians having. But I could be wrong. I mean, often there's people you like and you put your faith in them and they turn out to not be what you thought they might be. But I do believe that Tulsi generally spoke her mind and told the truth. That was what I liked about her as far as a politician. Not that politicians always need to tell the truth, because there probably are times that a government person doesn't need to just go blow everything out information-wise. But that being said, I'm not happy about any of the choices I have in this election.
Mark, I am there with you on that one. I am not happy with any of the choices in this election either. I was appalled by what I saw at the Democratic National Convention. And if I'm being honest, I was appalled at what I saw at the Republican Convention. What made you angry at libertarians? I'm curious.
Well, it's interesting that you have that view, because I'm voting for Trump. But of the two conventions, the one that bugged me the most was probably the Republican one. because I'm not voting for the Republicans for the reason that the core is voting for the Republicans. I'm an atheist. I don't care if they love God or don't love God or hate God or any of that stuff. I don't care about whether or not they love Jesus. What I care about is what they're likely to do if they gain power. And that's what everybody wants. They want power. So the question is, what are they going to do with that power? What kind of person are they? Are they going to use that power to generally oppress people, overturn basic market outcomes, or are they going to try to go wage war and in the name of some kind of grand peace scheme? I think what makes me have any correlation with modern progressives is, as an economist, I hate the near constant war that we're in. War is an exceptionally destructive force in any society. It warps markets. It warps information. It changes what we economists call the intertemporal nature of life. The entire dynamics between generations change because every time there's a big war to go fight, it's the next generation that has to pay for it because we don't actually raise taxes and pay for it. What we do is we print bonds and we say, hey, next generation, guess what? We know you want the American dream, but you have to pay for the first Iraq war. Then the next generation needs to pay for the next Iraq war. And then when you look at, okay, what did we get out of it? Did we get spoils even? No, we didn't get any spoils. Well, did we do anything great, wonderful, and moral for the world? Well, no, we didn't do that either. And then you scratch your head and you look at the numbers and you say, okay, from a cost-benefit perspective, looking at opportunity costs and all the things that we value, how closely did we achieve our values in this war? And almost 9 times out of 10, it seems like, we got nothing out of it and spent a lot of time, energy, money, resources, blood, sweat, and tears. And I think, I don't like to go give the positions of other people, but all my progressive friends, that's one of their top issues. It's why they liked Bernie Sanders. It's why they liked Tulsi. It's why they liked it's why they liked anti-war candidates, because just like me, they're sick of war too.
That's true, 1,000%. I agree with everything you just said. I mean, the emphasis on warping markets, yeah, that's true. I mean, from a war standpoint, the highest priority is winning, and everything and anything is subordinate to trying to win, because after all, if you lose, that's, you lose control, you lose that power to give deference to what you want to do. But it's also this notion that life, limb, $7 trillion, and like you said, what do you get? Like, it's usually a small group of human beings that are profiting off of the death and the $7 trillion of a nation. And so it's like, yeah, 1,000%, I can't disagree with you on that. There's something interesting you put on your Twitter feed that I love, and I want to talk to you about it. Thomas Sowell, economist. The first lesson of economics is scarcity. There's never enough of anything to satisfy all of those who want it. The first lesson of politics is to disregard the first lesson of economics. I love that quote. I disagree with that quote, but I love that quote. Yeah. So let's talk about it.
Thomas Sowell.
Yeah, Thomas Sowell, African-American economist. This puts me in the mind of Thanos. Have you seen that movie where basically Thanos gets the glove? He has absolute power of space, matter, and time, energy, soul, and all this other stuff. Yes, and the greatest conclusion that Thanos could come to is to wipe out half of life in the universe to ensure that the other half has enough. Now, am I wrong in making an argument?
Do you know where that notion came from?
Yeah, it's the what is the name of that guy?
Is it Malthus?
No,
Thomas Malthus.
Malthusian, right? The Malthusian idea of Malthus. Now, that's not entirely true, though, right? The moment that you add, he was an early economist that had. Oh, explain him. Explain who he is so the audience can know what we're talking about.
Sure, he was a very interesting guy. First of all, he had a lot of inventions. He was a smart guy, kind of like Edison. He was clearly a super interesting character. But from our perspective in modern times, he did really 2 things that really have shocked us. One is his argument that the population is growing geometrically and the resources are only growing arithmetically, and therefore eventually the world is going to become so populated that the only thing that can exist is just complete total chaos. So he was with Herbert Spencer in that social Darwinist movement, that the worst thing you can do morally is to help a person who's having trouble feeding themselves, because all you're doing is contributing to the problem. You're basically an intertemporal enabler, is what Malthus would say. And I thought it was fascinating when I watched those Marvel shows, and they would always be, and Thanos came right out of Malthus.
Yes,
and that
because he lived in lack.
Confronting a real scarcity there. The solution to Malthus seems to have been technology. But I want to go back to something you might know. The Sowell, Thomas Sowell, at the beginning of, I forget which book it was, the beginning of one of his books, he actually mentioned this. He was talking about Thomas Malthus, and he was talking about who he was responding to in that essay. Malthus was in his essay on human population. He was responding to William Godwin, who was like the first dude in Western civilization, as far as I can tell, to have been labeled an anarchist, the first quote unquote anarchist, a product of the Enlightenment, definitely, who was talking about human perfectibility. And I want to bring this back to the present. Mark, you were talking about a war, and the affinity that you have with the liberals in the United States, with the left in the United States. I don't want to misattribute this or mispaint it, but it seemed to come down for you to this rejection of war. But it seems to me like there's the potential. There's obviously a cultural war going on, and now literally 17-year-old shot and killed 2 people, wounded another. Back and forth. There's a defense argument. We can get into that too, but it seems like there's the materials for a war burning in the streets right now. I want to go. We were talking about Malthus. We were talking about this issue, him responding to William Godwin with perfectibility. It seems like we're in a cultural mode where we're trying to perfect ourselves, and fundamentally, we're also dealing with, from the government, simultaneously, scarcity, immense scarcity of response. Not actually that a huge amount of money printed out on the one hand, an abundance of wealth given out to banks, and on the other hand, a tremendous amount of scarcity. So it's this weird contradiction. Where does that leave us now? We've got to go into a break in a minute, so maybe we can keep this conversation going on the other side. But in a minute or two, just to take us into it, what's your take on our current position, Mark?
Yes. I'm reminded of an exam question I gave my students once in comparative economic systems. It was the first exam after we went over a review of basic economics, and this relates to that Sowell quote. I think the question read something like, pretend you are a really freaky person who loves salt water. Your demand for salt water is infinite. You're stranded in a rowboat on the Pacific Ocean. Evaluate the following subject. Salt water is no longer scarce. And the answer to that question would be false, because it is still scarce. Because even though you have relatively all the salt water you can drink, even though your demand for it is infinite, you are constrained by time in how much you can put down your throat. So the very concept of economic scarcity is what drives economics. There wouldn't even be a science of economics if there wasn't such a thing as scarcity. It's why I giggle a little bit when I hear people talk about we're going to end poverty, we're going to end scarcity, we're going to end these things, because it's just not going to happen. Even in the Soviet Union, even in the closest things we've been able to go measure.
Mark, I am so sorry to interrupt. We do have to close for the break, though. Wait, Mark, we do have to close for the break. I apologize to interrupt. You guys are listening to the economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, capitalist, Mark Frost. We'll be back in a moment. Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Fault Lines.
This is Radio Sputnik.
Tune in every
every Friday to Loud and Clear with Brian Becker for a weekly segment of the worst mainstream media headlines of the week. They tell us what's behind the worst, most misleading, and funniest headlines from around the news with Steve Patt of the blog Left Eye on the News. Together, they pull apart the corporate media's bias, spin, and downright lies. Tune in this Friday and every Friday for the worst and most misleading headlines of the week.
Fault Lines.
Welcome back to Fault Lines. My name is Jamarl Thomas. I am here with my co-host Shane Stranahan. We're joined by Mark Frost, economist, professor, consultant, drummer, Eagle Scout, Marine, capitalist. I think this is Shepturian and recovering libertarian. Mark, I love that example that you gave because I think that example is way off the mark. I think a better example would be if you had a rock star in the, let's say, 70s. And that rock star in the 70s loved cocaine, loved it to the point where his want for it was infinite. And he had the money for that infinite use of cocaine. And you find that rock star on the toilet, dead from either the use of cocaine, because he, despite his conceptual want for infinite amount of cocaine, he had a physical limitation in regards to the amount he could incur. The same thing is true with water. You can make an argument that his want for it was infinite, meaning from a conceptual standpoint, what he wanted. But physically, he always has limits in regards to the amount that he can take. So it is, to some degree, a constraint in regards to it, meaning this notion that the need of a person is infinite and therefore that there's no such thing or that scarcity can't be overcome. I'm making the point scarcity can be overcome. And it can be overcome through the lens of technology. And while you may have people that have infinite wants, that is absolutely true, there are limitations to those wants. That's a physical thing. That's not what the person wants in a conceptual sense. And so when I hear the quote, and let me do the quote again, because I want to be very clear what we're pushing at each other about. The first lesson of economics is scarcity. There is never enough of anything to satisfy all that want it. The first lesson of politics is to disregard the first lesson of economics. Now, I agree with the wants part. But when it gets into issues of scarcity, technology, to some degree, makes those things not real. I mean, we have the technology to ensure that everybody has the food that they need, housing that they need, and let's say the basic necessities of life to ensure that what we consider to be poverty with lack is not necessary. It's a choice that we make in our society. When Jeff Bezos gets $200 billion and they're saying he's going to have $1 trillion in 10 years, and you look at the rest of the world and you're like, wow, it seems that their resources are there to ensure those things. Now, am I wrong? And explain to me how I'm wrong with that perspective.
Yes, you are wrong. And the reason you're wrong is because the great policeman of scarcity isn't resources, it's time. I don't disagree with your cocaine analogy. I also don't disagree with your concept of technical innovation. In fact, what it means to be a Schumpeterian is you make the entrepreneur a fourth factor of production. It is the entrepreneur that disrupts the normal circular flow of everyday life. And that changes the relative supply and demand intertemporally. But a great example is love. What makes love so special? If you're Thanos, you can't really love. You live forever. There's no scarcity in your life. Big deal. This woman that you loved or this partner that you had that you just loved, you'll get another one because you have an infinite amount of time to get it right. It's the very fact that time is the great equalizer. None of us live forever. If we did, it would change all of economics. So it is economic activity set in time, which is the Schumpeterian thesis. It's the in time part. That's why he founded the Econometric Society. It's also why people like him and I tend to reject the neoclassical comparative statics, where they look at an economy as a pie and you can just start carving up slices and that the pie itself is static. That's just not true. But going back to the love example, the most fundamental need that a human being has is love. I'll argue that till I turn purple. It's if you are not loved in your life, if you've never been loved, you're going to be a damaged human being. People need love, yet many people don't find it. They find it once, and it's taken from them somehow, and they spend the rest of their life looking for it again, and it's because of time. Time is the great constraint. And Jeff Bezos only has a certain amount of time to share his wealth. Now, if you want to talk about would it be in society's best interest from a utilitarian perspective to forcibly take some money away from Bezos, because he won't miss it that much as long as you don't take too much. I mean, if you take 80% of what he has, then he'll miss it because you'll destroy his company. But let's say
Mark, let's actually turn for a second. I want to. You're leading into an interesting conversation. We were kind of wanting to talk about this anyway. The notion of profit. We're talking about Jeff Bezos recently registered as passing the $200 billion mark. Jeff Bezos, founder of Amazon, personal net worth now $200 billion. He's about, what is that? Almost 80 billion. That's $77 billion ahead of Bill Gates with $123 billion. So you have a kind of Pareto principle here where the leader is pretty darn far ahead. I think Zipf's law actually is another variation of this. The leader is pretty darn far ahead of the lagger behind, and then it just keeps on going like that. Anyway, talking about profit, you were talking about love. I want to go back to this for just a second. I had a comment and I wanted to change to profit. And I'll tie it in. The thing with love is it's really attention. Like you can feel deep love that you don't know how to put bounds on in your heart. And that love seems magical and mystical because it pushes so far past how you know to measure things. It's a feeling that's expansive. But what you're limited by is your attention and the ability to help people and to spend time with people. That's really the principle. But it's also, I want to take this to the conversation. Well, let's get into that. What do you mean by love is profit? That is a poetic, controversial statement. What do you mean by that?
When I started my business, or going back when I was young, when I decided to play drums, I did it because I wanted to achieve something. I wanted to experience the feeling and the self-worth and the into itself of being a good drummer. I wanted to experience the joy of learning and getting a PhD. When you're in love, what you're really doing is you're recombining the factors of production and getting something more than the sum of its parts. That's what a good relationship is. Anyone that's been in a good relationship will tell you, I loved being in this relationship because I was better as a result of it. And not only was I better, the other person was better. That's what we mean by profit. It means that when you add X plus Y, you get more than the sum of X plus Y, because there was a process in time within that equation that made the right side be larger than the variables on the left side. And
okay, wait, Mark, I want to jump in real quick because I think I might have a way to put the conflict that I think we're trying to get at here. What about personal profit versus public profit? In other words, if profit is like this miraculous thing where you're able to create sort of something out of nothing by people working together or simply by executing on your own intent, what about this idea of a notion of public profit? I mean, isn't that what socialism and these various sort of opposite ends of the spectrum at the opposite end of capitalism, which I would define as something like the incentive to personally produce and reap the rewards from your personal production, something like that. What about this notion of public profit or a wider profit that we shouldn't just think of how, we're earning what we create? What's your take on that?
I hate the entire concept of public profit, and any good Marxist and any good socialist would too. Marx's problem with profit was that he believed, why do you have to bribe a human being to do the right thing? Why does somebody have to have the goal of riches before they go invent the light bulb? Why do you have, morally speaking, why do you have to exploit land, labor, and capital before what moral principle allows you to do that? So I don't like the entire concept of public profit, because profit is by definition an individual function. And the reason for that is we don't have a collective consciousness. I don't care how close you are ideologically to somebody else. I don't care how similar the pain in your life has been to somebody else, how you process that pain, your valuation of that pain, and it could be the valuation of hopes and dreams as well, is different than every other person. That's what makes humans very unique. It's our consciousness that is inherently different. It's selfish, to be blunt. That's what makes human beings selfish, consciousness.
Just to interrupt for a moment, Mark, that's taught. I mean, in part. And don't misunderstand me, you're right. Meaning, if I'm experiencing something, it's me. Meaning, if I'm ill, it doesn't really matter if other people in the room, they may feel some kind of way about me being ill, they may love me, they care of everything else, but I am the one that is experiencing that hell. And so I agree with you. Even if it's something that you're trying to do as a team, you experience it differently. Fair enough. But there is a lowest common denominator. Meaning there is a point where a group of people say, we agree with that, because the experience is shared. And so I don't necessarily buy this notion that human beings are by definition selfish. I think human beings are taught to be selfish because of the economic system and the way they grow up and everything else. But if those human beings grow up in a different society, of course those people are going to be different, right? I mean, that's not inherent per se. That's more so people can be that way. But people can also be collective in the way that they act and function with the notion of best interest. Look, I agree with you with the Marx thing in part, that who's going to clean the warp coils, right? Like, nobody in Star Trek wants to clean the warp coil, so they use it as a punishment. Well, what if it wasn't a punishment? Who has to do it? And so you get to this notion that at some point, it almost feels like you have to give something. And whatever that something is, whether that's accolades from a soldier who's going to war and getting killed and believe he's doing it for his country, or whether that's $1. But I guess I'm making the point that it could be collective. I don't think it's not inherently right that people are selfish. Or do you believe that is true? I'm sorry, we have 30 seconds, Mark. I apologize. We got to get you back going here because I love these conversations with you. You've become to be one of my favorite guests. But 30 seconds.
Oh, but thank you. Yes, I absolutely believe people are selfish. And going back to love, the most selfish emotion a person can ever experience is romantic love. And if you don't believe me, try imagine saying this to yourself. I want to fall in love tomorrow, and I'm going to go find the most decrepit, the most non-demanded partner I can find, because that person needs me. Not that I desire them, not that I need them, but they need me. And let me know how that works out for you.
On that,
you're right. No, you're right. You are right. You're right.
Well, no, but the thing with that, we've got to go. It's just I want to get my last. The thing with that though is that love, romantic love, it seems like the ultimate goal of that is creating a child, which goes beyond those two people. In some ways, it's selfish, yes, maybe, but it's also ultimately selfless. That's the miracle of birth, which is the miracle of life. Anyway, we don't have time.
Childhood
Mark
is
Frost, great conversation. Yeah, maybe. All right, we should come back. We'll have more of this conversation.
Yeah, we got to fight on that.
Mark Frost, great talk. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan. We'll be back tomorrow with another 3 hours of the most disruptive show in American politics. Thanks so much for listening. You've been listening to Fault Lines with Thomas and Stranahan.
Guys, I want to thank you for joining us as always. I got to be honest, Mark, I so disagree with him on so much. And yet, it's the libertarian thing. Libertarians have this weird quirk where it's like half of what they say I agree with. I'd be like, yeah, I agree with that. And then the other half, I'm like, you've lost your mind. Mark is similar that way, right? Where you can get into these arguments where you see where he's coming from and he argues his point. It's not like ludicrous where he can't argue the point, he argues the point. And you're like, God, man, I disagree with that so much on so many levels. And an aspect of it I get, like the love thing, he's right. Love is selfish. And when you get into this notion, but that's not wrong. It's just kind of is what it is. By the same token, you could be born in a world where people would say, I love my wife, and I love the fact that my wife loves other people. And because of that, this is the way we function in our society. We have a collective society. So there are 2 husbands, maybe 3 wives, 20 kids, and all of these people collectively deal with it. Because they will make the argument that 2 people trying to raise a child is too difficult, you need more. You can come to all of those conclusions. It's just a quirk that we've ended up in our own. Don't misunderstand me. I'm making the point that that's not human nature. That's something that you're taught. But by the same token, in our culture, it is selfish. I'm loving this woman, and I dare another man to touch her. That type of stuff. And even justified, putting hands on somebody else if they touch your wife, despite the fact that your wife might have wanted that other person, or for that matter, your husband might have wanted that other person. Selfish by definition. Even childhood. The notion that you are going to bring something else into this world, and you have no idea what is going to befall that child, even in cases of illness. Meaning that parents could be ill, know that child is going to be ill, and still bring that kid into this world. It's what it is. There's something Mark also said about profit and love, like when he was talking about profit. I love chess. And, I asked my mom one day, I said, why do you do what you do? And she says, what do you mean? Meaning, did you think that I intentionally played chess? Meaning, do you think I started to play and I said, I am going to do this day after day after day after day? Or do you think I did it because something in me pushed it forward? Meaning, whatever was in me grabbed onto it. It had things that I loved. I loved the domination of others. Meaning, the ability to be able to beat other people in a fair game. They had their pieces, I had mine, mano a mano, and I come on top. I felt like cloud 9. I was on the moon. There was also this other aspect of puzzle solving, meaning you're in a contest. Somebody's trying to take your head off. You're trying to take theirs off. No quarter is given, none is asked, none is expected. And that gets that much more when you're playing somebody who's equal to you or better. Meaning if I am at my best, I'm 20, 30 something, and I'm playing somebody who's 2200. I fully recognize that this guy can take my head off. By the same token, he fully recognizes that given the opportunity, meaning if he fucks up in that game, I could do the same. And those are the most, it's hard to explain, man. It's like cloud 9. It's like you're in the middle of a fight and you are working out puzzles. You're trying to deal with somebody who's going after you. There are times where you need to defend. There are times where you basically set the shit on fire and said, I am going to win this game in the hell of glory. Meaning I am dropping that piece, I'm sacrificing that guy, I'm letting that guy go. And temporal initiative matters more than property and material. Meaning material has an advantage in the long run, but from the standpoint of an attack, that material matters less. You just need enough to mate him. And if you need to toss everything aside, even your queen to do so, you do it. Because what matters is the king. Everything else is subordinate. If I leave this game with 2 pawns, 2 bishops, and I win, yes, everybody else died, but I still win. Now in real life, doesn't entirely apply. In chess it does. And so I understand what Mark means when he's talking about profit in the sense of a competition and everything else. Yeah, I get it. Chess, like cash, has the things that make men happy. This quote goes. So I get it. But let's be clear. There's a difference between monetary profit and effects of monetary profit versus love, even though I know people can love their profit. I love having Mark going. God, I love those conversations with Mark. Those are awesome. Let's see. Who is this? This is Bilal Salam. Thanks. Well, thank you, Bilal. I appreciate you doing that. And let's see if we have anybody else. I'm going to call it a day. Guys, thank you for joining us, man. Fault lines. That's the point of this show, right? Disagreements, and be able to have those disagreements in ways that are sane, rational, hopefully honest, meaning people are not necessarily taking a side just to take a side because they're in some kind of political allegiance. But that's Fault Lines, man. Good show today. And just in case I make sure I didn't miss anyone, Wesley Walker. I don't see a Maximum Justice shirt. Wesley, I'm going to get that Maximum Justice shirt just for you. All right, guys. You might see me later today. And I think you're going to see me probably in a very few minutes on a study that's out. I'll see you guys in a few. Thank you.